Chapter 1288. The Uyghur girls and young men all looked very good when they danced, especially when the Uyghur girls twisted their waist in the dance. Poplar Fruit noticed that his daughter could not help but bend her waist. Kiki was a child who would be very happy when she heard music and saw others dance. Such elegant and beautiful movements, if not for the fact that she was a little shy, mainly because there were too many people she did not know, she would have danced with her sisters. Poplar Fruit looked down at his daughter and smiled. Kiki also seemed to have sensed it. She turned her head and saw that her father had noticed her. The little girl blushed shyly. Poplar Fruit grinned and gave his daughter a thumbs up. Kiki hugged her father and giggled. However, the welcoming ceremony was not over yet. The village chief began to ask the fathers and children to go up and show off their talents to the Uyghur friends. The first to go up was Hero Hujun, who had been pushed out by Lu Yi. He did not have stage fright and openly danced a figure-8 dance. He even waved a grape headgear around. The audience felt as if they were watching a strange wizard performing a dance. Lu Yi did not want to be outdone. He also ran up and danced a duck dance. At this moment, the enthusiasm of the scene had been ignited. The fathers who used grapes to dress themselves up weirdly went up to perform their messy dances. Even Poplar Fruit pulled Zhou Shimin up, and the two of them danced a few steps. 0 points for the posture, full points for the expression. Who asked Zhou Shimin to dress up as a woman to perform so ecstatically? The children also joined in one after another, and Chi-Chi had a lot of fun after blending in. Due to her excitement, her dancing was also very messy. She mixed up all kinds of square dances and folk dances together, and her demeanor as a little lady was completely lost. Poplar Fruit and the other fathers pointed at their children and laughed heartily. Such a joyous atmosphere was what they wanted when making a program. All right, after sorting out their emotions and removing the cumbersome grape decorations, the fathers and children gathered again and prepared to begin the afternoon's game segment for the grape festival. What game should they play? The fathers looked at the village chief in anticipation. My babies, look at the big box of ice cream. Who wants to eat it? The village chief held up a box of ice cream. Instantly, the 6 children raised their heads and looked over. Their 12 eyes were as bright as torchlights in the dark as they stared straight at the prize in the village chief's hand. He didn't need to ask to know the answer. Good. Now the 5 dads, please stick your heads into that hole. Show me your head. The village chief pointed at a long table with red grapes on it. Poochie. Just now, the fathers were still wondering what this table was for. They didn't expect it to be like this. Then, the babies have to throw the grapes into their fathers' mouths. Whoever can throw the grapes into their fathers' mouths first will get to eat the ice cream. The village head finally finished the rules of the game. So that's how it was. This game was quite interesting. When the fathers popped their heads out of the holes, they realized that they were still about a meter away from their children. Throwing such a big grape into his father's mouth from so far away was not a small challenge. The village head shouted for the game to begin. There were still some children who were confused and didn't know how to play. Among them was Kiki. Kiki, come, take a grape and throw it to your father. Poplar Fruit opened his mouth wide and explained to his daughter. Kiki's eyes lit up. She seemed to understand. The little girl stood on the small bench opposite them. Her white and tender little hand picked a grape and threw it over. Whoosh! The grape flew past Poplar Fruit's ear. Not bad, continue. Poplar Fruit smiled and encouraged his daughter. He thought that Kiki threw the grape askew. Rustle! Another few grapes brushed past Poplar Fruit, thousands of miles away from his mouth. Poplar Fruit finally realized that something was wrong. Although his daughter was looking at him, the moment she threw the grape, she looked to his left or right. Papa, we're about to win. The little girl happily said, we'll soon have ice cream to eat. How can you win? Poplar Fruit didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You didn't even throw it to your father. Kiki opened her mouth. Suddenly, the little girl covered her mouth with her 2 little hands and asked in surprise, Are you going to throw it to Papa? Even if she was surprised, the little girl still had an innocent and cute look. Sure enough, it was just as he guessed. Kiki misunderstood. Otherwise, how could she throw so many grapes and not one of them landed on him. Poplar Fruit had to explain to his daughter again. This time, Poplar Fruit deliberately explained it very clearly. And you have to throw it into your father's mouth. But if you throw it to Papa, Papa will feel pain. Kiki frowned and said with some puzzlement, "It's okay, grapes are so soft, it won't hurt." Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "I understand." Kiki's desire to fight rose. She pursed her small mouth and twisted her arms and wrists, just like how Poplar Fruit asked her to warm up when she practiced Benben Quan. The little girl became serious. Poplar Fruit looked at her. This was serious. He coughed twice and said, "Kiki, you can't use too much strength." Kiki began a new round of attempts. Although the little girl smiled sweetly, she seriously waved her little hand and threw the grapes to her father. "It's a little crooked when you throw it. You have to turn it to the right a little bit." Poplar Fruit kept reminding his daughter. Of course, Kiki's performance was getting better and better. At the beginning, she could basically throw the grapes to her father's face. Ouch! Poplar Fruit smiled. Just now, his daughter almost threw it into his mouth, and it just happened to hit Poplar Fruit's nose. Ouch! Hearing her father's cry, Kiki also cried out in pain as if she had felt it herself. She looked at her father nervously and asked with heartache, "Papa, does it hurt?" "It's fine, let's continue," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. He looked at the few fathers beside him. The most pitiful one was Jun Kong kept throwing things at his face as if it was a prank. Jun's father cried out in pain. Compared to his daughter, he was simply a heating pad. Kiki's aim was getting better and better. Like Poplar Fruit, she had practiced martial arts and had better control of her body than the average child. The little girl began to throw a grape into Poplar Fruit's mouth, and more of them hit the mark. Actually, Poplar Fruit didn't care much about whether he threw it in or not. The main thing was that his daughter was very happy. Seeing her jump in joy after throwing one in, Poplar Fruit felt very happy. "Cheers! Cheers! 5. Poplar Fruit encouraged with a smile. But there was no time. 10. Zhou Shimin, who was next to them, suddenly shouted. Xianxian's reaction was even more intense. He jumped and screamed excitedly at the village chief. "Yeah, we won." "Yeah." Failed at the last step. Chapter 1289. Lin Yongjian was the most pitiful one. He and Jun cooperated very well this time. They had already eaten 9 grapes, but they couldn't eat the last one no matter how hard they tried. In the end, they lost the competition. Kiki felt a little regretful. She had just found the feeling. The game ended. "It's okay. We'll win the next round." Poplar Fruit smiled, rubbed his daughter's head, and said, "You're already very good. I think I like this game very much." Kiki took her father's hand and said happily, "And I can throw it very accurately. Of course, you can throw it into the hollow. You're definitely a sharpshooter." Poplar Fruit gave his daughter a thumbs up. At this time, Xian began to open his prize. Hao and Jun also went over to look. This ice cream was very attractive to children. Xian. Hey. Zhou Shimin stopped Xian, who was about to eat. On one hand, he wanted him to share first. On the other hand, Zhou Shimin winked at his son and said, First, give that." "That who?" Of course, it was Xian's favorite sister, Kiki. Xian understood. He scooped a spoonful of ice cream and put it in front of Kiki's mouth. Kiki happily ate it and then softly said, "Thank you." Little chubby Xian calmly turned his head and walked back, but it was obvious that he was happy. As if encouraged, Xian loudly continued to distribute the ice cream to his friends. After eating a little ice cream, Kiki was satisfied. However, she still couldn't forget the game just now. Kong wobbled and crawled under the table. She stuck her head out of the hole and experienced what her father had experienced earlier. Kiki saw it and happily ran over. She stood on the small bench and smiled sweetly at Kong. "Brother Kong, I'll play with you, okay? You throw it." Chairman Kong said, as if his words were gold. "Open your mouth." The little girl pinched a grape and looked at it. She smiled happily. Kong's mouth was wide open, but her eyes were fixed on Kiki. Her sister's smile was very beautiful. This time, Kiki got the hang of it after throwing it twice and successfully threw it into big brother Kong's mouth. The siblings looked at each other and smiled knowingly. The girl giggled brightly while the boy smiled faintly. This scene was as beautiful as a painting. The second round of the competition was more complicated. First, the dads had to stand on the ice and scramble to finish the bunch of grapes in their hands. Standing on the ice, even Poplar Fruit sucked in a breath of cold air. It's so cold. Most importantly, it was the difference in temperature. It was midsummer in Turpan. Just a moment ago, they were standing on the hot floor. Now, they were stepping on a block of ice that was emitting cold air. Only those who had experienced it personally could understand this feeling. "Papa, you can do it." Kiki didn't know what to do. She waved her small arms and cheered for her father. Poplar Fruit, who quickly recovered, stabilized his body. The ice was very slippery. He said to his daughter, "Go over there and wait for Papa's order. Then, go and pick the best tools to make the grape juice." Seeing that the other dads had already started eating, Poplar Fruit also hurriedly took action. Needless to say, Poplar Fruit's performance wasn't bad. He ate the grapes quickly, unlike the other dads who ate while complaining that the grapes were cold. Under the cameras filming, Poplar Fruit rarely worked so hard. He sucked in the grapes like a storm. His mouth was stuffed full of grapes. Every time he chewed, the green grape juice overflowed from the corner of his mouth. This was too funny. The audience, especially Poplar Fruit's fans, lamented, "My Appa, why do you not care about your image?" Finally, Poplar Fruit was the first to finish the battle. However, just as he desperately swallowed the grapes, Lin Yongjian had already finished speaking the tongue twister vaguely and asked Jun, who was still in a daze, to pick up the tools. Poplar Fruit didn't want to be outdone. He clearly finished the tongue twister. Poplar Fruit couldn't sing, but for Poplar Fruit, who was about to get a doctorate in Chinese, it was absolutely easy for him to recite the tongue twister. However, he didn't care about this. He hurriedly ordered his daughter to pick the tools to make the grapes. In fact, the tools to make the grapes were also very strange. There were sticks the size of 2 index fingers, spatulas, and even small spoons and chopsticks. The sticks were the best. Kiki picked them herself. In the end, she picked a small spoon. She didn't know which one was better. She wasted the good opportunity that her father fought so hard for. All right, Poplar Fruit didn't care too much. He instructed his daughter to squat by the wooden basin and use the spoon to make the grapes. However, seeing his daughter make the grapes one by one, Poplar Fruit looked up at the sky. She was going to do it until the sun went down. Luckily, the frivolous Liu Yi suddenly thought of a good idea. He shouted, "Liu Yi, stand on it and step on it." Liu Yi obediently did, as he didn't even take off his shoes. He just stood on it with his 2 feet. Wait a moment. What's wrong? Didn't the village chief say it just now? In the end, they had to make a cup of grape juice and let the father drink it. Wouldn't Liu Yi end up drinking grape juice mixed with sand? However, all of a sudden, this made the other father's thoughts become active. "Kiki, take off your shoes. Stand on it." Poplar Fruit first covered the grapes with a filter cloth, allowing the grapes to curl into a ball. Then, he let his daughter hold his shoulder and took off her shoes, revealing her fair and clean feet. They stepped on it one after the other. "Will it stink?" Kiki held her father's hand and stepped on it one by one. She giggled to herself, "Let me smell." In order to make the show more interesting, Poplar Fruit really let his daughter raise one of her feet. Then he moved his face closer and sniffed. "It doesn't stink. Daddy washed your feet for you in the afternoon." It was really smart. He was even praising himself. However, it also amused the girl so much that she couldn't stop laughing. She laughed until her feet lost strength. As the father and daughter played, they forgot about the competition. In the end, first place was snatched away by Liu Yi. Of course, Poplar Fruit let his daughter work hard and was the second to stand on the ice cube. Gulp, gulp. Poplar Fruit finished the glass of grape juice in big gulps. "Pop, is it good?" Kiki, who was next to him, asked curiously as she respectfully helped her drunk father down. "It's good. It's the taste of your feet soaked in grapes, Kiki. It's sour and refreshing, delicious." Poplar Fruit couldn't help but laugh. The little girl also giggled. This time, she understood her father's subtext, but she also felt that it was fun, so she was half shy and half happy as she hugged her father's thigh and laughed. Of course, the other fathers hadn't finished yet. Their spirit of participating in the competition for the second place continued. Poplar Fruit didn't even need to teach them. Kiki couldn't help but run over to help. Today, Teacher Lin, Brother Zhou, both of you drank Kiki's feet. How do you feel? Poplar Fruit was the last to go up and put his arms around the shoulders of his two big brothers, laughing mischievously. Ha! Chapter 1290. Having lost the competition once again, Kiki felt a little regretful. That was because it was just a hair's breadth away. If she had worked harder, she could have gotten first place. However, luckily, the little girl's participation and enthusiasm to help her friends lessened her regret. Poplar Fruit also comforted his daughter. It's fine. In the next round, let's strive to get first place and win the ice cream. Kiki nodded. She licked the ice cream that he had given her and said to her father, I really like to eat ice cream. The third round of the game was to eat grapes while blindfolded. This was not shown in the program, but it was indeed there. The rules were that the children had to be blindfolded. Under the instructions of their fathers, they had to fumble around and eat the hidden red grapes in a bunch of hanging green grapes. Of course, the fathers also had a task. They had to bend down and raise their heads to eat a bunch of grapes that were about the same height as the grapes that their children were eating. Bend down in a standard posture. Your hands cannot touch the ground. Otherwise, you will be punished by us Uyghur ladies. The village chief pointed at a Uyghur beauty holding a water gun and chuckled. It's fine, it's fine. Poplar Fruit smiled and said to his daughter, This is what your dad is good at. He did a demonstration. He pushed his legs on the ground and bent his body backwards. As he bent, he actually formed an inverted U shape and used his hands to grab onto his thighs. Holy shit! The audience expressed their confusion. Was this the flexibility a human should have? Let's not talk about a normal person leaning backwards. Even if they had to bend their head forward, lean against their knees, and hug their ankles with their hands, this was already a huge challenge. Out of 100 people, probably not many could do this. Poplar Fruit was actually able to flip upside down. Wouldn't his waist break? Everyone was scared witless. Louis even screamed like a little girl. Of course, it wasn't that no one could do this. Some top dancers could do it, but these people were very rare. Furthermore, they were mostly girls. Their bodies were already as soft as a snake. Poplar Fruit had exceeded everyone's imagination. We have to win this time. Kiki raised her little arms happily and threw herself into her father's arms. Poplar Fruit gave her a lot of confidence. After wrapping the cloth around the little girl's eyes, Kiki reached out to hold her father's hand. Then she stuck out her little tongue and said happily, Papa, I can't see. It's okay if you can't see. Daddy will be your eyes. Poplar Fruit pinched his daughter's little nose with a smile and said, Later, Dad will tell you where to go and how far to go. You just follow Dad's instructions, okay? Okay. Kiki nodded obediently. That was what he said, but it wasn't easy at all to do it. The blindfolded little girl was like a lost deer. After leaving her father's hand, she couldn't find her way. Left, no. Turn right, yes, go 2 steps, no. 5 steps. In fact, Poplar Fruit wasn't the only one who was as busy as ants on a hot pan. The other fathers were also running around in circles like children. It wasn't that the fathers were nervous, but that they didn't cooperate with their children as well as they thought. For example, when they told them to go left, the children would turn around in a daze and couldn't find their way. Poplar Fruit's face was blooming with a smile. Kiki was so interesting. No matter how the game was, the performance of I Am Your Eyes with his daughter was very funny. When Yanghua told her to take 2 steps, the little girl hesitated and took 2 very small steps, unable to let go. Then, when Yanghua got used to her daughter's pace and told her to take 5 steps, the little girl walked and walked and walked, and the steps became bigger again. It was uncoordinated, but it was very funny. Poplar Fruit was so happy that he patted his thigh and forgot to give his daughter instructions. Clang! Yanghua turned pale with fright and hurriedly rushed forward. Just now, when Poplar Fruit turned his head, Kiki bumped into the wooden pillar in a daze. If it was just a light bump, Poplar Fruit wouldn't be so anxious, but from the sound, It was obvious that it wasn't a light bump. Woo! Poplar Fruit caught his daughter and didn't let her fall to the ground, but the little girl was already panicking. After being hugged by her father, the little girl began to cry. "How are you? Are you okay?" The other fathers asked with concern. "I'm fine. It's a little red." Poplar Fruit gently lifted his daughter's bangs to take a look. It was indeed a little red, but fortunately, the skin wasn't broken. Poplar Fruit smiled and said to the other fathers, "You guys continue." Looking at Kiki's crying state, he knew that the father and daughter could not participate in this competition. In order not to interfere with the other children's competition, he carried his daughter to the back and looked for the program's doctor. He didn't think that his daughter was so delicate that everyone had to stop to serve her just because she fell and bumped. In the past, when Poplar Fruit was in the countryside, the children were raised freely and ran around without shoes. When they fell, they patted the soil and stood up by themselves. How could they be like the children in the city now? All of them were the pearls of their families. Their parents couldn't bear to scold them, and they didn't want the teachers to discipline their children. How could they be successful if they were spoiled? It's okay. Don't cry." Poplar Fruit smiled and coaxed his daughter, saying, "It's just a bump. Our Kiki is the strongest. Don't cry. Kiki's crying gradually stopped. She was in her father's arms and pursed her lips, but her little hands were still hugging her father's neck. "Does it still hurt?" Poplar Fruit gently touched his daughter's forehead. This red and swollen area was sprayed with some medicine. He said apologetically, "It's Dad's fault. I didn't take good care of you. It still hurts a little." The little girl's mood calmed down a little. She leaned close to her father's ear and said softly, just now, it was so scary. I couldn't see, and then I bumped into it." Chi-Chi's voice was faint, and there was a hint of lingering fear in it. Poplar Fruit suddenly realized. He smiled and held his daughter's little hand, his big hand, and asked, "So, Kiki cried just now not because of the pain, right?" Kiki pursed her lips and nodded. She thought about how she felt just now. She felt wronged and scared and wanted to cry. "It's okay. After we bumped into it once, we'll know in the future." Poplar Fruit gently smiled. His right hand was still brushing his daughter's bangs, while his left hand helped the weeping girl wipe her tears. "Get out of the way." Suddenly, Kang's cold voice came from outside the crowd. Poplar Fruit, who was sitting in the photography group's gathering place to comfort his daughter, raised his head and saw Kang walking over from the crowd. When the little boy came closer, he didn't have that cold and indifferent look from before. Instead, he looked a little nervous. Chapter 1291. Kang won the third round of the competition. He got the ice cream from the village chief, but he didn't open it immediately. Instead, he walked straight to where Kiki and her father were. Kang didn't forget that when he pulled down the cloth covering his eyes, he saw Kiki in her father's arms. His sister's forehead was red and swollen, and she was crying like a kitten. Her pitiful appearance was heartbreaking. Later on, Kang would occasionally pay attention to his sister, who was surrounded by the crowd. Although Chi-Chi stopped crying later on, Kang was still a little worried. As a result, Kang didn't look very happy when her father won. Poplar Fruit looked up and saw Kang walking in. He smiled and nudged his daughter, saying, "Kiki, look, Brother Kang is here to visit you." Kang saw his sister turn around. Her cheeks were wet, and her eyes were red. She looked so pitiful. His cold aura disappeared and was replaced by a nervous pout. "Put this on your head and chill it." Kang walked over and held up the prize he just won. He put on Kiki's forehead. "Wow, Kang, you're so nice. You put ice cream on Kiki's wound." Poplar Fruit praised with a smile. "Uncle thinks you're great." Kiki was still in a daze. However, the coldness that came from his forehead did lessen the initial pain by quite a bit. "Here, I'll hold it. You eat it." Poplar Fruit helped Kang hold the ice cream on Kiki's forehead. Kang quickly removed the plastic packaging on the wooden spoon and opened the ice cream. He dug out a piece and fed it to Kiki. Kang said simply, "You eat first." Kiki's vision was blocked, so she couldn't see Kang. She opened her mouth and took a sip of the ice cream. The cold ice cream was sweet and it was as if the sweetness had reached her heart. "Thank you, Brother Concon." Kiki's voice was soft. She didn't choke up anymore, and her voice became clear and pleasant. "You eat too." Poplar Fruit did not finish his sentence. Concon then turned the wooden spoon around and used her small head to scoop a spoonful for herself. Next, his movements were very nimble. He flipped the bowl again and took a spoonful from Big Head to feed Kiki. Poplar Fruit was dumbfounded. It was hard to believe that such a young child could be so meticulous. He didn't know if it was because the ice pack had alleviated the pain or because she had forgotten the pain after eating the ice cream. But the little girl was in a good mood again. Seeing his daughter bouncing back to the square with Big Brother Concon to play, Yang was lips curled up. He suddenly felt a little emotional about these children's youthful innocence and cuteness. Concon is awesome. Poplar Fruit did not follow them. He was interviewed by the director in front of the camera. He smiled and gave a thumbs up, saying, "Did you notice that Concon used one side of the spoon to feed Kiki and then ate himself with the other side of the spoon? Very attentive and considerate." Poplar Fruit praised. "He's only 6 years old. This is amazing." Poplar Fruit liked Concon's character so much because he was the same type of person as Concon. Both of them are Scorpios. Poplar Fruit was the same. He was also very attentive and considerate to the person he liked. In his opinion, a real good man should be like Concon. Dinner was very sumptuous, and everyone ate happily. However, Kiki was a little special. She didn't eat mutton, so she didn't have many choices. "Do you want to try the mutton skewers?" Poplar Fruit smiled and put the mutton skewers in front of the little girl's nose, but Kiki shook her head firmly. "Okay, I won't eat it." Poplar Fruit didn't care. Everyone had something they didn't like to eat. Kiki didn't eat mutton or spicy food, but beef fried rice was okay, as long as she was full. Everyone thought that Kiki was unhappy, so the fathers came to comfort the little girl. "Poplar Fruit, I heard from Teacher Lin that your house is like this. How can you live in such a place?" Louis moved over and patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder. "How about you and Kiki sleep in my house together?" Afraid that Poplar Fruit didn't understand, he smiled and said, "Our big bed is from here to there. It's super big, and it can fit more than 10 people. Poplar Fruit smiled and didn't answer. Beside him, Noah, he also came over and invited his good friend Kiki. "Kiki, how about you sleep in our house tonight? We can play together." Poplar Fruit lowered his head to see how his daughter would answer. "No, I won't be with Daddy tonight." Kiki giggled. "Let's play together tomorrow after we wake up, okay?" "No, Kiki, listen to Uncle. Your house is too shabby. At night, the wind will blow and it will be very cold. Uncle's house is very big. You could do somersaults on the bed." Louis personally explained. "You can come over with your father." Kiki subconsciously looked at her father, wanting him to make a decision. "Do you want to go?" Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Poplar Fruit was actually thinking about whether to go or not. After all, Kiki was a girl. Poplar Fruit couldn't bear to let his daughter endure such a harsh environment. But he hoped that his daughter would be with him and not run away after being invited by her friends. Under such complicated thoughts, Poplar Fruit decided to let his daughter make the decision. "I don't really want to go." Kiki pulled her father's hand, raised her head, and waved. "I want to stay in our treehouse and watch the stars." The little girl's face was full of anticipation, as if she could see a fairy tale fairyland in front of her. Poplar Fruit laughed. He looked at Lu Yi and said, "Then let's call a night." Poplar Fruit was actually bursting with joy and was even a little smug. He was extremely satisfied with his daughter's performance. Only now did he realize that even if the environment was difficult, he still hoped that his daughter would stay and spend it with him. Nono was not discouraged. He turned around and went to look for Brother Concon. However, Brother Concon also rejected his invitation. "Brother Nono, let's play together tomorrow, okay?" Kiki saw that her good friend was repeatedly rejected and was a little depressed. She went up to him and said, "We can play together in the morning again." "All right then. I want to see Princess Iron Fan tomorrow." Nono said, "I want to see her too." Kiki nodded happily and said, "I haven't seen Princess Iron Fan yet. She's very beautiful. She said she wants to be good friends with me, but I'm embarrassed." Do you think she's beautiful or I'm beautiful? Do you think she's beautiful or I'm beautiful? Hey, look. Isn't that a bird? What a high EQ young man. He actually knows how to change the topic. Chapter 1292. In the evening, in that leaky attic, Poplar Fruit and his daughter sat cross-legged on the clean and soft bed, chatting for a while. Although it was already past 12 o'clock in the evening, the little girl was still not sleepy because of the time difference. Today, you said that you want to stay and live in the home we chose. Dad is very happy. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, although you only said that you want to stay and look at the stars. The little girl waved her hand, mischievously smiled, and said, it's not exactly about looking at the stars because Papa said that since we chose it, we have to stick to it. Her soft long hair spread on the bed and waist, exuding the soft fragrance of shampoo. The light above her head shone on it, reflecting a faint luster. It was very beautiful, just like a fairy scattering flowers. Dad thinks that it's great that you can think like this. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, this means that you have grown up and gradually began to understand the meaning of responsibility. Huh? Kiki looked at her father in puzzlement. Responsibility is that you have to learn to overcome difficulties for the promise you made, for the choice you made, to the end. Poplar Fruit said in a soft voice, Dad will give a simple example. When you were young, you suddenly appeared in Dad's world. This was the first time that Poplar Fruit talked about Kiki's birth. Kiki began to look at her father and listen attentively. At that time, Dad was very poor, didn't have a car, and didn't have a big house like ours. Poplar Fruit gestured and said with a smile, at that time, Dad just rented a house that was about the same size as ours. Your appearance has suddenly disrupted Dad's life. Poplar Fruit didn't talk about his ex-girlfriend's departure. When you were young, you were very naughty. Whenever Dad left your side, you would cry. Later, Dad also resigned from his job and could only revolve around you all day. Chi-Chi blinked her eyes. She was also doing her best to flip through her memories. Of course, even though Chi-Chi's memory was very strong, she didn't have complete self-awareness yet. Her memories before she was 1 year old were already very vague and blurry. Someone told Dad to give up on you because Dad can't even take care of himself. How can he take care of you who can't take care of herself? Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter affectionately and said softly, but Daddy didn't do that. Do you know why? Because Papa loves me. The little girl's voice was soft as she looked at her father nervously. Yes, but the most important thing is responsibility. Poplar Fruit laughed. You know what? The first time I held you in my arms, I knew you were my daughter when I saw you, silly girl. Blood is thicker than water, and the feeling of being connected by blood has tied you and me together. And the first time you opened your eyes, you smiled when you saw Daddy. Daddy still remembers that you didn't have a single tooth at that time, so you were very small. Poplar Fruit seemed to have been immersed in his memories. In his slightly moist eyes, it was as if the shadow of the little guy from back then had appeared, overlapping with his daughter who had grown up into a little girl in front of him. Kiki couldn't hold it in anymore. She threw herself into her father's embrace and tightly hugged her father. Her voice was choked with sobs as she said, don't cry. When you cry, I also want to cry. Fool, Daddy isn't crying. Daddy is smiling happily. Poplar Fruit tenderly rubbed his daughter's slightly wet hair and said, that's right. You were like this when you were young. You needed Daddy to hug you to sleep at night. You needed to hear Daddy's heartbeat to be able to sleep soundly. I also want to hug Papa to sleep tonight. Kiki stretched out her white and tender arms, wrapped around her father's neck, and said coquettishly, ha! Poplar Fruit laughed heartily. After sorting out his emotions, Poplar Fruit continued to talk about the topic of responsibility. Because I felt the responsibility of bringing you up, because I felt the responsibility of a father to protect his daughter, Daddy ignored the objections of many people and kept you here and then took care of you until now. What about in the future? Kiki asked somewhat apprehensively. In the future? Of course, in the future, it will continue. Daddy will always be your guardian angel and will love you for a lifetime. Poplar Fruit smiled. Papa, I suddenly feel so happy. Kiki continued to change the topic. She giggled, hugged her father, and buried her head in his embrace. I'm also happy because I have such an obedient daughter like you. Poplar Fruit also hugged his daughter and laughed. That's because I have a papa who loves me so much. Kiki raised her head, imitated her father, and then giggled. Do you want to go see the stars? Poplar Fruit asked with a smile. Let's go outside and look. The vines here are blocking the view, so we can't see clearly. Okay. The little girl was reluctant to get down from her father's arms and softly said, I want Daddy to hug me. Yang was suddenly smiled craftily and stood up. Her two hands quickly moved behind her back and spun the little girl 360 degrees up, down, left, and right as if she was performing acrobatics. Then, Chi-Chi suddenly appeared on her father's back amidst a series of screams. It's going to fall. The little girl giggled, tightly hugged her father's neck, and leaned on her father's back. In fact, she was not afraid at all. In her father's palm, the little girl only felt safe. Moreover, she actually had a little dark attribute that liked excitement. It won't fall. Daddy is holding you. Poplar Fruit put his arms behind his back, dragged the little girl's butt, and calmly walked outside. The wind outside was a little stronger, but when they looked up, they saw a bright starry sky. Grape Ditch was more than 10 kilometers away from Torpon City. It was not far, but it was not close either. After all, they had to go through the long and desolate Gobi Desert to reach this oasis. Therefore, this place was not polluted by the city lights, and the starry sky was as beautiful as the overturned Milky Way. So beautiful! Kiki was on her father's back, sticking to her father's thick and warm back. She did not feel cold at all. She looked up at the beautiful, starry sky, and there was a little infatuation in her eyes. Poplar Fruit was also full of emotions. The last time he saw the starry sky in the yellow plateau, it was not so pure and clean. Too beautiful. It was so beautiful that Poplar Fruit wanted to sing. I'll accompany you to watch the pop rain, falling on earth. Yangwa couldn't help but hum softly. This was the theme song of an idol drama that was popular throughout the country when Yangwa was in junior high school. It was the most beautiful memory of her generation. Woo! Unfortunately, just as he started to sing, his mouth was covered by a soft little hand, and the little girl said angrily, Daddy, don't sing. Don't you know how bad your singing is? Haha. Chapter 1293. Thank you to Do Lu for your tips. I'll add a chapter today. The morning came not early. It was already past 9 o'clock. The sky was just like 6 o'clock in the morning in the eastern region. The sun gently jumped out from the horizon. Poplar Fruit was dressed in white clothes and white pajamas. He stood at the corner of the terrace of the house, looking at the oasis and desert in the east. He was like an ancient swordsman, looking at the beautiful sunrise. If he didn't dance with his sword, he should write a poem. Kiki. However, this elegance was soon broken by Dajuan. A lively little boy ran in from outside and was about to climb up. Dajuan, you're up so early? Poplar Fruit turned around and smiled at Dajuan. Slow down. Don't fall. Dajuan ran up to the attic, panting slightly, but he was very excited. He looked up and asked, Uncle Poplar Fruit, where's Kiki? She hasn't woken up yet? Poplar Fruit smiled and said, Not yet. She played too late last night and is still sleeping. The little girl was too excited to watch the stars yesterday and kept asking her father to tell her stories about the constellations. As a result, she slept a little late. But now it was time to get up. Yangwa led to June inside and saw a little girl who had kicked away her blanket and was lying on her stomach. She was sleeping soundly with her limbs spread out. She really treated this place as her own home. Poplar Fruit smiled and pulled the quilt to cover the little girl. He was not afraid that she would catch a cold. His daughter had just kicked the quilt off. It was not cold in the summer morning, but her sleeping posture was too messy. Kiki, wake up. Brother Dajuan is here to play with you. Poplar Fruit said softly. Oh, the little girl was shaken awake by her father. She squinted her eyes and scratched her head. She looked up at Brother Dajuan, who was standing beside her. Kiki, wake up. We're going to play. Dajuan said excitedly. He couldn't wait. The little girl suddenly remembered how she looked when she had just woken up. She shyly covered herself in the blanket like a coward. Poplar Fruit laughed. As a father, he knew his daughter the best. He smiled and said to Dejun, Dejun, you go find Xian and the others first. I'll help Kiki wash up. All right then. Dejun nodded his head and ran down the stairs. After Yonghua helped her daughter wash up and change into a light blue floral dress and shoes, Dejun came back when she had her daughter sit on the bed obediently. He was not alone. Nua, he was also happily following behind him. As soon as the two boys entered the door, they shouted, Kiki, hurry up, let's go play. I saw a lot of sheep yesterday. June suggested. Let me take you to see the sheep. All right. Nua, he excitedly activated the vibration mode again. He, wait for me. Brother Brother Dejun, wait for me. The little girl stepped on her beautiful pink running shoes and ran out energetically. Even though she was groggy when she woke up and was still a little grumpy, after washing her face with the cool and comfortable well water, Kiki recovered all her energy. Hearing the little girl's crisp and pleasant voice, he was in a good mood. However, Yonghua was not happy. He happened to be brushing his teeth. When he came out of the bathroom, he only saw his daughter running away with her friends while chatting away. She ran away just like that? Poplar Fruit shook his head. After he finished washing up, he walked out and looked at the photographer. He knew that he wanted to talk about his feelings. What other feelings could he have? Poplar Fruit waved his hand and smiled. I thought that when she was 14, 15, 16, she would go play with the boys and ignore her father. For years old, he shook his head and sighed as he wiped his hands. He even turned his head back and raised 4 fingers. He added sourly, at 4 years old, she was taken away by the boys. The little girl did not abandon her father like that. Yesterday, she had even affectionately confessed her love for her father. However, when he thought of his daughter's happy back, Poplar Fruit could not help but feel a little jealous. Luckily, not long after, Poplar Fruit and the equally disappointed Lin Yongjian set off together to pick up Zhou Shimin and Lu Yi. Kiki and her friends ran back happily and played around by their father's feet. With such a joyous atmosphere in the morning, the cold Kong Kong was infected and joined the group of friends. He was pulled along by Kiki and became the little princess's strong shield. Kiki hid behind Brother Kong Kong and made faces at Nua, and the rest. However, there was always a bad person who added trouble and pain to everyone's happy breakfast. At the gathering point for breakfast, as expected, the village chief did not let the fathers have a peaceful breakfast. This time, breakfast still needed to be fought for through games. Let's beat up the village chief together. Louis shook his head and said, Jejia was an ancient tug-of-war competition. However, unlike tug-of-war, Jejia was a one-on-one competition. Furthermore, one could not use one's hands to pull the rope. Put this end of the rope around your neck. The fathers followed the village chief's instructions and tried the Jejia position. Immediately, their faces turned green. What was going on? The rope went past their chest and under their pants. Then, they would lie down and pull the rope on all fours like a horse. The position was not a problem, but if they were to pull the rope like that, wouldn't their balls burst? Village chief, you bastard! Before it began, the fathers' faces turned gloomy. They felt their balls tighten and gave the village chief an unfriendly look. They wished that they could switch places with him and let him do it. There was no other way. Variety shows had a life and would never stop tormenting. That was not all. The 5 Uyghur men who were going to compete with the Fathers team actually used a large blanket to wrap their bodies below their heads and walked up in a ball. This meant that even if the fathers were to choose their opponents separately, they would not be able to discern their opponents' physiques and combat strength. Tianji's horse racing idea was immediately crushed. The Fathers team discussed and decided that Lu Yi would be the first to go up. Poplar Fruit would be second, Hu Jun would be third, Lin Yongjian would be fourth, and Zhou Shimin would be last. There was nothing much to say. Let's begin. Unexpectedly, Lu Yi gave his all in the first battle. Although he was a little unsteady at the beginning, he suddenly exerted his strength and quickly defeated his opponent. No, he started pulling me over. In the end, he showed mercy and let me pull him back. Lu Yi held the Uyghur uncle's hand and smiled. However, Regardless of whether he betrayed them or not, Lu Yi had won the first round. This was a good sign. Poplar Fruit rubbed his fists and prepared for the next round. Poplar Fruit's strength was unquestionable. Although the people watching were a little nervous, Poplar Fruit believed that he would definitely win. Chapter 1294. Not only did Poplar Fruit want to win, but he also wanted to lay a good foundation for the remaining contestants of his father's team. Since Tianji's horse racing could not be done, Poplar Fruit decided to do the opposite. It would be a king versus king match. When the Uyghur uncle that Lu Yi had chosen walked out, the gap was quickly closed. No one could see it clearly, except for Poplar Fruit. Yang with sharp senses allowed him to clearly see the figures of the remaining four opponents. Therefore, he had to choose the strongest one among them. This was just like in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. When two armies fought, the general, or the strongest general on both sides, would come forward to PK. If Poplar Fruit could defeat the strongest contestant of the opposing team, then it would not only boost the morale of his team, but it would also reduce the pressure on the remaining fathers of his father's team. Therefore, after Poplar Fruit chose his opponent, the Uyghur team looked at each other in surprise. Then, a burly man with a stocky back and a bear's waist walked out. He was definitely not as tall as Poplar Fruit, but it was obvious that Poplar Fruit was not his match in terms of weight. His arms were as thick as Poplar Fruit's thighs. Of course, this was an exaggeration. There was no need for pleasantries. If you want to fight, then let's fight. Poplar Fruit put on the rope and lay down. However, he immediately felt a gentle tugging sensation. It was not caused by his opponent. Poplar Fruit turned around and saw that it was his daughter. Kiki ran over and helped her father hold the rope. She looked like she wanted to help in the tug-of-war. Seeing this, Poplar Fruit paused the match. He smiled and turned around to rub his daughter's head. He looked at the little girl who was worried about her father and said, "It's okay. Daddy can win. There's no need for Kiki to do it." Only then did he coax the little girl back into the audience. He prepared again. Poplar Fruit was not like Lu Yi. His upper body was very low, while his lower body was supported by a pair of long legs. This way, the rope would not strangle his crotch. He didn't want to be in so much pain. Even Poplar Fruit's expression changed when he heard the pain in his crotch. "Listen to my whistle. 3, 2, 1, beep." The village chief's whistle opened the curtains of the second match. "Good luck, Papa. Go, Poplar Fruit. Uncle Poplar Fruit, you can do it." The shouts of both the children and the adults had reached the climax. Meanwhile, the battle between Poplar Fruit and his opponent was still in a tug-of-war. The two of them were actually evenly matched. Of course, Poplar Fruit held back his strength and probed his opponent's depth first. What made him feel regretful was that his opponent's strength was not as strong as he had imagined. He had only used 20% of his strength, but his opponent was already unable to move him. It was no wonder. Poplar Fruit's strength was so great that it had reached an inhuman level. Even Big Bear and the other two true strongmen could contend against him. No matter how strong his opponent was, he was still in the category of a normal human. With this comparison, the difference was huge. He did not think much of it, but his opponent was horrified. His face was as red as blood, and he was unable to move Poplar Fruit at all. Furthermore, he could clearly feel that Poplar Fruit was still doing it with ease. After probing for 2 seconds, Poplar Fruit decided to use his strength. He only used a little strength, and the burly man behind him was pulled back by the rope around his neck. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not use too much strength. Friendship came first, competition came second. If he hurt his opponent, he would not be happy. "Yeah, my papa won," Kiki shouted happily, but her voice was already drowned out by everyone's cheers. Poplar Fruit's victory was indeed beyond everyone's expectations. It must be known that Poplar Fruit's opponent was very strong. This surprise of turning defeat into victory greatly boosted the father's team's morale. The third person was Ujun. He was the strongest among the 5 fathers. At first glance, one could tell that he was very powerful and had a lot of fighting power. However, Hujun's opponent was also very strong, although he looked a little older. Sometimes, being strong did not mean that one could win the competition. Take Jun, for example. He was actually in a half-standing position with his hands not touching the ground. The rope was strangling his crotch. It was painful just looking at it. Jun could not exert any strength at first and was about to fall back. Suddenly, a shadow flashed beside him. Kong Kong rushed up and grabbed the rope. Whether it was useful or not, the little boy's concern for his father was very touching. Go, and help Brother Kong Kong. Poplar Fruit did not want to help, so he secretly pushed his daughter. The little girl who received the signal quickly ran over and followed behind Brother Kong Kong, preparing to pull the rope. Seeing that Kiki had already gone up, Xian, Nua Yi, and Jun did not want to be outdone and rushed up to help Jun. One child did not have much strength. 2 children added together did not have much strength. But what about 5 children? In other words, with 4 children, Kiki, who was as strong as 2 boys, and Jun, who could still exert a little bit of strength, the rope miraculously stabilized. Senior brother, press your body down. Just now, Lu Yi saw Poplar Fruit's performance and secretly learned from it. He quickly taught it to Jun. Jun's strength was not bad. After he recovered, he actually succeeded in turning defeat into victory. This could be considered to have created a small miracle. Father's team won 3 consecutive victories. For a moment, cheers and laughter filled the air. The morale was at its peak. It even gave people the feeling that they were going to win 5 consecutive victories. Even Lin Yongjian, who was about to go on stage, was smiling brightly. It was as if he was going to win the competition before he even went on stage. Indeed, the audience was also looking forward to Father's team creating a miracle. Although Lin Yongjian was the weakest out of the 5 fathers, one should not forget that he was the only one out of the 4 fathers who had won the mud-carrying competition in Min Province, who said that a black hole in the game would never have a chance to turn things around. Moreover, Lin Yongjian's opponent did not seem to be very strong. It was not as strong as the previous few. Could it be that there was a chance? There was really no chance. In the face of strength, there was no such thing as luck. Lin Yongjian was, after all, old. Moreover, Teacher Lin was the type who did not like to exercise. He was pulled back in an instant. Even if the 5 children went on stage to help again, there was no way they could win the competition. Lin Yongjian lost. It was not unexpected. However, he was also very magnanimous. He laughed loudly and hugged his opponent. The last to go on stage was the equally strong Zhou Shimin. Although he did not have the help of the children, the village chief had stopped the children from cheating. He relied on the explosive strength in his body. After stabilizing his body, he suddenly exerted force and directly dragged his opponent to the finish line. There was no 5 consecutive victories, but Father's team achieved a rare victory of 4-1. This could be said to be a miracle, so much so that when they were eating breakfast, everyone was still happily discussing this matter. Papa, where are we going next? After witnessing the great battle of their fathers, the children were also excited and enthusiastically welcomed the next challenge. Chapter 1295. Following that, it was time for the Truth or Truth Challenge segment. The production team found an excuse to separate the children from the fathers. The fathers went to the comfortable monitoring room and sat or lay down on the big Kong bed. They watched as the children were brought into the mission room one by one to be interrogated by Uncle Afundi, who was disguised as them. This is the first time I've seen a broad and fat Afundi. Poplar Fruit smiled and gestured to the other fathers. In the cartoons we watched in the past, Afundi was very thin, right? I feel that the village chief is more suitable to act as Master Bai. The first child was brought into the room. The father saw from the big screen that the person who opened the door was Xian. The father who was not his child was still happily talking and laughing, but Zhou Shimin, who was his son, was clearly a little nervous. It was different from before. This time, the village chief used black technology. He introduced it to Xian. This is a very angry hat invented by the village chief. When it's the truth, it won't light up. When it's a lie, it will light up. This toy was obviously fake. Whether it would light up or not depended on whether the village chief pressed a hidden button in his hand. However, the children would not be like the adults and think that it was fake just by looking at the rough workmanship. They would first believe the village chief's words. Then, like Xian, they would begin to feel nervous. Although he was quite honest, little chubby Xian would still occasionally lie. After a few rounds of answers, Xian completely believed that the machine would detect his lies. Hence, he suddenly revealed his secret. Dad used a belt to hit me. In the monitoring room, the fathers were all surprised. Luye's reaction was even more exaggerated. His mouth was wide open, and he had a look of shock. Of course, Poplar Fruit had also experienced being beaten by his father when he was young. However, even if he was born in the countryside, his father had never used a belt to hit him, let alone a city child who was spoiled. Even Poplar Fruit, who was born in the countryside, had never been hit by his father with a belt. Even an adult would not be able to take a beating from a belt. "You really used a belt?" Hu Jun asked with a smile. "I used this to scare him." Zhou Shimin laughed. He moved his two hands closer and stretched out to demonstrate. This was not called hitting. It was just the sound of the belt to scare the child. Of course, Xian was still a very cute and honest child. He honestly explained the reason. "I was the one who hit my brother first." Little chubby Xian himself knew that this was wrong. During the test, every child was guided by the village chief to show their truest side. What touched his father and the audience was that the 5 children were all very kind and pure. Their hearts were like a piece of beautiful jade. Xian said that the reason why he didn't like his mother kissing his father was because he wanted his father and mother to kiss him. He would also be happy for his little brother to be kissed by his parents, because that was his little brother. It was the same for Dejun. During the village chief's question and answer session, Dejun nearly made his father cry. He was touched. Hu Jun and the other 3 fathers had a whole new level of respect for her. "I like Daddy. I like you very much." Even though the village chief had turned on the light of the lie detector machine, Dejun still said firmly, "I like it when I smoke, and I like it when I don't smoke. If he is sick, will you still take care of him?" The village chief's question was the key to pushing this feeling to the peak. "I will. I don't allow him to smoke, but he still smokes. If he doesn't listen to you, are you still willing to take care of him?" "I'm still willing." Dejun did not hesitate. At this moment, the monitoring room was silent. Lin Yongjian was holding back his tears. Anyone could see that he was touched. Thinking about Dejun's performance this time, it was much better than the previous 2 trips. Did he use some kind of technique? That's not it. From the program, we could see that the dialogue between Dejun and the village chief was very simple. It came from the bottom of their hearts. The reason why the fathers in the audience had a whole new level of respect for Dejun was because the village chief had really peeled off Dejun's heart. He had brought out his sincerity and kindness that had been ignored by everyone. And all of this was Dejun's original, genuine personality. The third was Kong Kong. To be honest, the fathers were very confident in Kong Kong. Louis even said that Kong Kong's performance was the best. Poplar Fruit also said, "Right, I feel that Kong Kong is very, very sensible and smart." Poplar Fruit really liked this child who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside. Not necessarily. Hu Jun laughed heartily. He made a motion of taking off his hat and said, "If things don't go well, Kong Kong will say, 'This game is too childish.' Put down hat. Let's go." Kong Kong entered the door. Under the village chief's greeting, she put on the lie detector hat. Kong Kong's expression is very calm. She was not affected by the village chief or the environment. Poplar Fruit said with a smile. In comparison, the 2 children in front seemed a little nervous. However, they were not. Kong Kong was also nervous. After hearing the village chief's description of the lie detector machine, Kong Kong began to cover her ears. Not only was she afraid of the noise, but she was also worried that she would be found out if she was lying. "Do you like Dad?" Towards this question, Kong Kong was the first to answer that she did not like him. She was very honest and very firm. "Why don't you like him? Has he hit you before? Has he been fierce to you?" The village chief's question immediately made Hu Jun, who had been teasing the other fathers in a relaxed manner, sit up straight. Kong Kong said weakly, "No, The village chief did not press the button, but asked, "Is it true?" Kong Kong really did, as Jun said. He took off his hat and said, "Forget it. I'm not going to try it." The little boy's voice was still very calm, but he was indeed a little nervous. However, at this time, the monitoring room was already filled with laughter. The fathers were clapping and laughing. Some of them were laughing because of Junshin's guess, and some were praising Kong Kong's wit. Kong Kong used such a way to express the fact that his father had indeed adopted a strict way of educating his son. In fact, Kong Kong was still all right. Although he had been challenging his father's nerves, the other fathers and the audience's jokes, for example, holding a knife, chopping off my hand, Zhou Shimon's scaring was nothing compared to this. Another example was choosing the airplane Lego over the company of his father. However, Kong Kong still showed his emotional side. With Lego and a father, he's happier this way. After saying this, Jun began to quiet down and reflect on whether he had done something wrong. "I think Kong Kong has actually grown up." Poplar Fruit suddenly said. He was a teacher and had taught elementary school children before, so he had a better understanding of children's psychology. He thinks more, so sometimes he is more rational in some aspects. Jun looked over in confusion. Poplar Fruit smiled slightly. He gestured up with his two palms and continued. In his heart, he actually wants Brother Hu's company. This should be ranked above the toys. But why doesn't he choose the answer he desires the most? Right, why? Because he understands that it's impossible for you to sacrifice your job to stay with him. Poplar Fruit said softly. So after suppressing his feelings for a long time, he rationally tells himself that the best choice should not be the one he desires the most. Was this deception? No, this was also sincerity. Chapter 1296. After Kong Kong went out, Poplar Fruit suddenly became nervous. It was completely different from the calm expression he had when he was analyzing the children's psychological problems with Jun. Because the fourth one would be Kiki's turn. "You're nervous too?" Zhou Shimon patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and smiled. Now that the children who were questioned by the village chief were brought to lunch, there was nothing for them to worry about. Thus, Zhou Shimon was now very relaxed. Poplar Fruit smiled and nodded his head, generously admitting, "Of course, in our country, the exams are all for the children and parents, right? It's normal to be nervous." He wasn't nervous about his own exams, but now that his daughter was going to be tested, he became nervous. "Will Kiki be too scared to go in?" Lin Yongjian asked. "This house is dark, and there's a strange person inside." "It shouldn't be. Don't look at Kiki as a girl. She's actually quite brave." Poplar Fruit smiled. Moreover, with the village chief inside, she won't feel scared. There was one thing that Poplar Fruit didn't say. He felt that with his daughter's intelligence, she might be able to see through the authenticity of the village chief's machine. For a little girl who could recite the first 2 seasons of the show, pointing out the flaws of the show was a very easy task. But sometimes it's not good to be too smart. Poplar Fruit was a little worried, because if she was too smart, she might stand out from the crowd and make the audience feel disgusted. Creak. On the screen, a white and tender hand pushed open the door, and a little girl with a cute ponytail walked in. "Ni hao, beautiful little girl. Welcome to Afundi's house." The village chief began to act mysterious again, using a strange tone to say. Kiki didn't immediately walk up, because the person in front of her was still very unfamiliar. She stood at the door and looked at the village chief in confusion. No matter how she looked at him, she felt that he was very familiar. Come, come, come. Please take a seat." The village chief stroked his non-existent mustache, chuckled, and invited Kiki to take a seat. Kiki's eyes suddenly lit up. She giggled and pointed at the village chief. "I know, you're not a Fundi, you're the village chief. All right, you found out." The village chief also smiled mischievously and did not continue to speak with that strange accent. He guided the little girl who had lowered her guard and walked over to sit on the seat opposite him. "Look, this is my latest invention." The village chief played with the big hat and repeated the words he used to fool the other children. "So powerful? Chief, are you a scientist?" Kiki looked at the village chief with admiration. I know. The village chief is the same as Slow Yang Yang. They are both super amazing inventors. However, village chief, you don't have a white beard. Your beard is black. What a mess. The village chief was interrupted. He stared blankly and helplessly changed the topic again, putting the machine on Kiki. At first, Kiki withdrew her hand in fear. She looked pitifully at the village chief and said, "Village chief, I'm scared." She was afraid that it would hurt. "It won't hurt. There's cotton padding inside. Look, it doesn't hurt even when you pinch it like this." The village chief demonstrated and even showed his fingers to Kiki. Only then did the little girl obediently put on the equipment. "It really doesn't hurt." Kiki nodded and giggled. Seeing his daughter's performance, Poplar Fruit relaxed a little. At least she didn't mess up this game of truth. From this, it could be seen that although the little girl was very smart, but in front of adults she was familiar with, she would easily believe the words of adults. She didn't have independent thinking and lacked the initiative to distinguish truth from lies. This wasn't a good thing, but for a 4-year-old child, and a girl at that, one couldn't expect too much, right? "All right, let's start our questions, shall we?" The village chief said with a smile. First question, do you think the village chief is handsome? Haha. In the monitoring room, the fathers all clapped their hands and laughed. They were all talking about Lu Ye's suggestion to ask this question. As expected, the little girl who liked to support nodded and said, "Handsome." Then, the hat on her head lit up and made a sound. The little girl understood what this meant. She smiled embarrassedly and was so shy that she didn't dare to look at the village chief. "All right, I'll ask again. Do you think the village chief is handsome?" The village chief smiled. "Not handsome." Kiki stuck out her tongue and smiled embarrassedly. The little girl was very kind. She hurriedly added, But village chief, don't be sad. Although you're not handsome, you're a good person." This was 100 times the critical hit. In the monitoring room, the fathers were rolling around on the Kong bed with laughter. The audience helped to say what was in their hearts. The village chief was actually given the good person card by the 4-year-old "My daughter. Although you're not handsome, you're a good person." The little girl would occasionally say golden sentences. It was believed that after this episode was broadcast, this would become a popular phrase on the internet. Kiki did not understand why the village chief was clutching his chest in pain after she comforted him. She was worried that the village chief would be sad, so she gave a final explanation. Luckily, the village chief was just pretending. In a blink of an eye, the village chief recovered his smile and said, "Thank you, baby." Hearing you say that, the village chief is very happy. He prepared to ask the next question. "Village chief, can I ask you for a favor?" Kiki suddenly said. The village chief was surprised and asked, "What is it?" Chi-Chi giggled a little embarrassedly and said, That's right. Can the village chief also call me Chi-Chi from now on? Darling isn't my nickname anymore. Papa calls me Kiki." The village chief keenly grasped this question. He felt that there should be something interesting to reveal. He smiled and asked, "Whose nickname is baby?" "It's Mama Ma," Kiki replied indifferently. "Mama Ma has the word bay in her name." After saying that, she smiled sweetly. She did not know that she had told the village chief some of her family's little secrets. "Oh, then does Daddy call Mommy baby at home?" The village chief inherited the paparazzi's fine tradition and asked to get to the bottom of it. In the monitoring room, Poplar Fruit had already covered his forehead. Hearing the laughter of the other fathers next to him, he lamented in his heart, "Silly girl, you sold your father out." "No." Kiki revealed the truth. She smiled and said, "Papa calls Mama Ma baby. Yo." In the monitoring room, the 4 unscrupulous fathers made a strange sound at the same time. They pushed Poplar Fruit, who was covering his face, and laughed. The meaning of ridicule was self-evident. After this video was broadcasted, it also aroused the discussion of netizens. There was a point of view that they were most interested in. Poplar Fruit has 2 daughters. One is called Yang Luachi, and the other is called Fong Bei Bei. Chapter 1297. No one would have thought that the extremely intelligent Kiki would divulge a secret. However, this was also very normal. All children were like this, including Kong Kong, who also said a lot. After all, they regarded the village chief as a reliable and close friend. Poplar Fruit's eyelids twitched. He felt that his daughter was going to cheat him again. "Do you love Daddy?" "I love Papa. I love him very much," the little girl said with a smile. This question, for the little girl, would never need to think because there was only one answer. "If Daddy kissed Mommy, would you feel unhappy?" The village chief asked with a smile. "Why would I feel unhappy?" Kiki blinked strangely. She did not understand what the village chief meant. "Because Daddy kissed Mommy, but not you," the village chief said. "I will say, Papa, I also want a kiss." Kiki giggled. "Then Papa will kiss me." The answer was irrelevant, but just like the little girl's happy mood at the moment, the little girl did not feel unhappy at all. "Then does Daddy kiss Mommy more, or Kiki more?" the village chief continued to ask. In fact, the village chief asked a lot of questions, but most of them would be edited in the program, leaving only the children's amazing words. So far, the village chief only pressed Kiki's helmet once, but it seemed that the little girl was very honest. The village chief probably did not have many opportunities to play. Just now, he had asked a lot of questions about Kiki's family. The village chief decided to ask Kiki some questions about herself. "Do you like kindergarten?" the village chief asked. This question he asked a lot of children before, such as Xian Xian and Dejun. Under the village chief's guidance, they all said their own thoughts. Indeed, most children do not like to be restrained by teachers in kindergarten. What would Kiki say? "I like it." Kiki nodded. However, the village chief pressed the lie detector, and Kiki's hat rang again. She said, and touched the hat on her head in confusion. The fathers laughed, but Poplar Fruit didn't. He frowned and said, "That's not right. This Kiki isn't lying. She really likes kindergarten." Similarly, Kiki also looked at the village chief in confusion. She was very innocent and confused. "Kiki likes to go to kindergarten?" the village chief asked again. "Yes, I like kindergarten. I like to play with my friends." Kiki nodded. She felt that she was not lying. Her big eyes were filled with sincerity and confusion. "It's true. Village chief, please check it." The village head thought of a way to cover up his lie. He pretended to fiddle with the machine and said, "Oh." The village head wants to apologize to Kiki. Because the village head's invention malfunctioned, it made a wrong judgment just now. "Kiki, can you forgive me?" "It's okay." "Village chief, don't be sad." Slow Yang Yang also often develops disobedient machines. Chi-Chi nodded. The kind-hearted little girl stretched out her little hand to comfort the village chief. She pressed on the village chief's arm and said, "Daddy said that failure is the mother of success. So, village chief, you will definitely succeed." What the hell was this? He was actually being lectured by a 4-year-old child. The village chief was touched and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He patted the little girl's hand and said, "Thank you, Kiki. The village head will continue to work hard." In the monitoring room, the fathers were all laughing. Louis clapped his hands and laughed until he couldn't breathe. He said, I'm dying of laughter. Poplar Fruit, Kiki is too talented. Failure is mama of success." "All right, village chief, I have another question." The village chief said, "No one is perfect. Everyone has flaws, and there are things that they don't do well." Then, "Kiki, what do you think is the thing that you want Daddy to correct the most?" Poplar Fruit immediately became spirited. He crossed his legs and focused on watching. Kiki held her cheeks and looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle. This question seemed to be a little difficult for her. "In other words, what do you think is Daddy's biggest flaw?" the village chief asked. "Daddy has no flaws." The little girl waved her hand. She pouted and said sullenly, But, I really want Daddy to accompany me more." No one would have thought that Kiki, who accompanied her father the most, would say such words. "Is it because Daddy is often not at home?" the village chief asked. Kiki shook her head like a rattle drum. She denied it and said, "No, it's because Daddy sometimes has to go on business trips, and then he leaves me at home." What's the difference between this and not being at home often? The village chief didn't understand. But Yongwo understood. He suddenly felt a sense of loss on his daughter's little face. What kind of feeling was that? Daddy left you at home and went on a business trip. So Kiki is very disappointed, right? The village chief tried to understand Kiki's thoughts. That's right. In the past, Papa would take Chi-Chi out to play. The little girl nodded. She didn't know if it was because of the accumulation of emotions, but the little girl actually said with red eyes, I don't want to leave Daddy. But Daddy's business trip is also for work. If he takes you out, won't he also have no time to accompany you? The village chief tried to ease Kiki's mind. He analyzed to Kiki, if he takes Kiki out, Daddy will have to take care of you. This will bring a lot of inconvenience to his work. I know Mama told me. Kiki pursed her lips and said, so I need to learn to be independent and not bring trouble to Daddy. If it was said that Kiki suddenly came up with such an idea, all the fathers didn't expect it. But at this moment, Kiki showed understanding, which was beyond everyone's imagination. Poplar fruit. To be honest, although I'm older than you by more than 10 years, I envy you for having such a sensible daughter, Lin Yongjian suddenly said. At this moment, Poplar fruit was completely silent. Later, Poplar fruit seriously said in an interview with the program group, this is my lack of consideration. As parents, sometimes we do take things for granted. I think that she has grown up and doesn't need to stick to Daddy anymore. I think that she can understand Daddy's difficulties in leaving her at home. I think that with Mommy accompanying her and calling her every night, she can feel relieved. Actually, that's not the case. Children have their own point of view. She likes me to take her wherever I go, because it's always been like this before. Adults can rationally leave space for each other, but children will magnify this grievance. Kiki has already restrained herself very well, but I didn't notice it. Where are you going, Daddy? Kiki told me before that the reason why she wants to participate in this program is because she can travel with Daddy, complete tasks together, and grow together. Really, I'm very grateful to this program, which made me realize my shortcomings as a father. Chapter 1298. Back in the show, Poplar Fruit was still looking at the big screen and reflecting on himself. Kiki didn't feel bad for too long. The little girl was originally an optimist. After chatting with the village chief for a while, she began to happily talk about other things. All right, that's the best question. In order to enlighten her, the village chief looked for a question that she was more interested in. He smiled and asked, in kindergarten, do you think you were the most beautiful girl in your class? Everyone thought that with the little girl's personality, she would nod her head. She often talked to the camera and asked the camera if she was beautiful. Besides, Kiki was so beautiful. Even if she nodded her head, no one would think that she was vain. Not to mention in Kiki's class, in the past 3 seasons, even in so many parent-child shows, it was difficult to find my daughter who was prettier than Kiki. But Kiki was stunned for a moment and shook her head. No, the village chief asked in surprise. He had already made a mistake once before and didn't dare to mess around again. Kiki was a very opinionated child. No way. The village chief thinks that you should be the prettiest. No, Julia, Ran, Xiao Xiao, and many of my good friends are very beautiful. Kiki seriously defended her friends. Also, I don't want to be the prettiest girl. Kiki said very seriously. Only a bad queen wants to be the prettiest girl. Dad said that I want to learn from Snow White. Snow White has a beautiful heart, so she has many good friends. You even told this to the child? Zhou Shimin asked Poplar Fruit in surprise. It must be known that these principles were difficult for even elementary school students to understand. Children's minds were simple, so when parents educated them, they rarely talked about principles. Instead, they directly told them what was good and what wasn't. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, I only told her once in a while. I didn't expect her to remember. Actually, this matter had to be explained from the time Kiki participated in the kindergarten drama. At that time, after the Kiki performance, many parents told the Poplar Fruit that Kiki was really beautiful in front of her. Some even said that Kiki was the prettiest. After coming back, the little girl smiled happily for the whole night. Fong Bei was worried that the little fellow would be too proud and that she would be isolated in kindergarten because of her pride. so she asked Poplar Fruit to chat with Kiki about life before going to bed. Poplar Fruit chatted with Kiki very skillfully. He used the story of Snow White that he had just performed and was still very popular. He told her that beauty was a wonderful thing, but if she deliberately pursued beauty and deliberately wanted to be the most beautiful person, she would become a bad person like the Witch Queen. Poplar Fruit also told Kiki that a good child should learn from Snow White. The reason why Snow White had so many good friends and Prince Charming liked her was because her heart was pure and beautiful. Poplar Fruit gave some examples of Snow White helping the dwarves to cook, make the bed, wash the clothes, and clean the house. Chi-Chi might not be able to accept it very smoothly if he were to directly explain the great principle. But through Snow White's story, the little girl easily understood her father's meaning and also understood this great principle somewhat exaggeratedly. Therefore, after one night, the little girl returned to her usual well-behaved and lovely self and was not affected by those praises. Of course, if everyone said that she was beautiful, the little girl would still be very happy. She would still bashfully smile for a while in her father's arms, but that was only because she cared about her appearance and did not want to compare herself with others. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not expect that his daughter would remember the things he told her so clearly, especially the sentence of the queen, which left the deepest impression on the little girl. Poplar Fruit did not know if this was due to him or the fairy tale. After receiving the village chief's praise, Kiki left happily. The Vitality Girl did not have the grievance of being on the verge of tears. Under the camera, she cheered and ran towards the place where the director said her good friends would gather. The cameraman could not keep up and could only watch from afar as the pair of fair and long legs ran away. Next, there was still the last No-E. Among the 5 children, the most difficult one to grasp was No-E. Just like what his father said, he's very easy to fly. Nuayi's way of thinking could be said to be unconstrained. Often, while you were still lingering on a topic, he would have already jumped to another story. Of course, in traditional Chinese classrooms, the evaluation of such children was very bad. They felt that they were restless, or they were described as hyperactive. But from another perspective, or from the perspective of a more tolerant Western classroom, weren't these children also very active and creative? For example, Nua would often use the village chief's words as a reference to the world of Journey to the West. If the first few children brought about touching feelings, warmth, and even surprise for Kiki, then what Nua brought to the audience was uncontrollable laughter. For example, when the village chief asked Nua if he had seen Guanyin Bodhisattva, even if the village chief lit up the helmet and made a fuss a few times, Nua still firmly said that he had seen her. Why did he say that he had seen her? Because he had seen Sanya's southern sea Guanyin. That was a statue of more than 100 meters tall. From the perspective of a child, this statue of Guanyin was undoubtedly the real Guanyin Bodhisattva. Of course, the village chief was also cursing in his heart. Are you fucking kidding me? But from a child's point of view, Nua, he was indeed not lying. However, following that, when the village chief asked if he liked his father, his hand trembled and accidentally lit up the helmet. This triggered a hidden plot that made the audience burst out in laughter. So, when Nua said that he liked his father, it was a lie. Liu Ye's suspicions in the monitoring room had been slapped in the face. Why was it a lie? Under the village chief's questioning, he found out that Nua was sad because his father liked his younger sister more. With regards to this, he was very certain. Why does father like his younger sister more? Asked the village chief. Sure enough, Nua once again gave an answer that made people convulse with laughter, because his younger sister is also his son. The boy was not only face blind, he was also gender blind. He was so silly that he could not differentiate between a son and a daughter. Of course, after the laughter, the village chief began to stir up emotions. Under his guidance, Nua showed his sensible and filial side. What do you want your father to become? A happy father, a real father. When your father is old, lying in bed and unable to move, will you still love him? I don't love him anymore. Behind the shocking words, There was indeed an indescribable pain, because he will die. Although he said that he did not love him, his heart was filled with reluctance and longing. He would send his father to the hospital and take good care of him. Nua, he shed tears. In the monitoring room, Lu Yi was also moved to tears. If not for so many fathers watching, he would probably have also shed tears. Aren't you looking down on your child? Poplar Fruit patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile. Although the Q&A had ended, the fathers all went to have lunch. However, in their hearts, they wanted to see their children more. After listening to their thoughts, even Poplar Fruit wanted to talk to their children. Chapter 1299. In the morning, there was only a small program in the Grape Gully, but in the afternoon, they spent their time in the car. After resting for a few hours, the environment suddenly changed, and they came to the Woolistaili Ranch in Eurostali. Although it was called a ranch, it was no different from a prairie. Although there wasn't the magnificent scenery of cattle and sheep in the wind, the endless grasslands and rolling green hills still amazed these city children. "Papa, is this the Hulumber Prairie?" the little girl asked excitedly. She had transmigrated to the second season, which was also a beautiful prairie. "No, that one is in Inner Mongolia, and we are now in Xinjiang." Poplar Fruit laughed. This conversation was not recorded by the program crew, because the sponsors were different. The fathers took their children and stood in a row. Then they arrived in advance. The village chief, who was dressed as a local, rode a tall horse and led the Kazakh villagers in front of the children. The welcome of the Kazakh people was different from what they had seen in the past. They sang and danced, and there was no custom of forcing people to drink. However, everyone was wearing their best national costumes to welcome them. What made the children very happy was that a Kazakh ant threw candy in front of them. "Papa, I want to eat. I want to eat." Kiki, this greedy little cat, picked up a candy and couldn't help but pull her father's hand, asking him to help her tear open the candy wrapper and eat it happily. As usual, the village chief sat on the tall horse and said a few words of welcome in a strange tone. Then, without any transition, the village chief announced the first task of the day in the prairie. "Snatch a house. How to snatch a house." The village chief pointed at the prairie about 1 kilometer away. There were so many white tents, which were scattered there like an astrolabe. However, there were only 5 houses arranged by the program crew. According to the village chief, the houses were divided into 5 levels. The good ones were very good, and the bad ones were probably not better than the 3 houses Poplar Fruit stayed in yesterday. If they wanted to snatch a good house, they had to work hard together with the children. Whoever ran there first would be able to snatch the house they wanted. When the village chief was talking, Poplar Fruit was already rubbing his hands, laughing, and doing warm-up exercises with his legs spread. Poplar Fruit is already starting to run. The village chief pointed at Poplar Fruit and laughed at the fathers. Immediately, the other fathers followed suit and started twisting their arms. "My axe is thirsty." Poplar Fruit laughed. "Village chief, bring it on." She wasn't sure if she could rely on luck, but if she relied on her physical fitness to get a good house, Yonghua was still very confident. Following the village chief's order, the fathers took their children and dashed out like arrows leaving the bow. Of course, this was also an exaggeration. With a child, it was impossible to speed up. "Zo, poplar, 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 poplar. I can't run anymore. Daddy, carry me." Xian whined as she ran. Short legs, slightly plump, and curly hair. They were trying their best to jump on this grassland that was higher than his knees. It looked quite distressing. However, little chubby Xian wasn't such a useless child. Listening to his cries, he was full of energy and didn't even pant. One could tell that he was just lazy and wanted his father to carry him. His father hugged his younger brother and not him. Although little chubby Xian wasn't particularly jealous, he still felt that it was unfair. But how could Zhou Shimin carry him? Even though Xian and Hao Hao were only 3 years old and 2 years old respectively, the 2 of them were still very heavy. Xian was even heavier than Kiki and Nuyi, who were much taller than him. Jogging while carrying Hao Hao was already very strenuous for Zhou Shimin. The main reason was that he was tired. After all, he practiced boxing, which required explosive power, and not long-distance running, which required endurance. Let's not talk about Zoshimon's side. Poplar Fruit and Kiki were running very fast. In the beginning, Poplar Fruit was still carrying his daughter and running. They didn't leave any traces on the grass, as if they were running on flat ground. It was as if they were riding on a small electric scooter. But this position made Kiki very uncomfortable. Poplar Fruit could only put the little girl down. It had to be said that Kiki's athletic ability was still very good. The frequency of her steps was very fast. In addition to her slender legs, her strides were also very fast. Kiki and her father were far ahead and ran in front of all the children. "I like it here. Daddy, I like it here." The little girl giggled as she ran. She was afraid that her father couldn't hear her clearly, so she said it a second time. Poplar Fruit knew that his daughter didn't have the heart to compete for the house. The reason why she was running so happily was because the feeling of running in this endless grassland was too comfortable. Just like a horse, the wider the place, the more they liked it. And Kiki, who likes speed in nature, was also the same. Running in this grassland, feeling the soft grass, enjoying the comfortable breeze, and looking at the rolling and vast green. No wonder she laughed so happily all the way. In the blue sky, white clouds float. Under the white clouds, horses run. Poplar Fruit was actually the same. He also liked the grassland. As he ran, he also became excited. As if he was reciting a poem, he recited the grassland ballad. "Daddy, what are you talking about?" The little girl still couldn't understand. She ran while giggling and asked, "Daddy is singing." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Nonsense. You don't sing well, he..." The little girl mischievously ran away. In the laughter, Poplar Fruit and his daughter unknowingly completed a long-distance run. Kiki actually persisted. Room number 1, if it wasn't for the flag fluttering in the wind with the word number 1, Poplar Fruit wouldn't know that this was room number 1. It was just a pile of grass. How could it be called a room? Speaking of which, yesterday's room was not the worst. This one was right. Of course, Poplar Fruit saw the tent parts next to it and knew what was going on. Poplar Fruit took his daughter's hand and walked straight through the first pile of grass. Only the little girl curiously looked at it. However, when they arrived at room number 2, Kiki threw that curiosity to the back of her mind. "Wow, Daddy, this house is so beautiful." The little girl exclaimed in surprise. At this time, Kiki's vocabulary was still somewhat lacking. She remembered some of the praises she heard before, but she didn't know how to use them. But Kiki's praise was correct. This yurt was too spacious, at least 40 square meters. Moreover, the floor was covered with a wool blanket and the bed was clean and tidy. The big bed was also very stylish. Yesterday, Lu Ye's big bed that could sleep more than a dozen people was not as big as this one. "Do you like it here?" Poplar Fruit touched his daughter's head and asked with a smile. Chapter 1300. Really? Can we live here? Kiki looked at her father happily and asked. When she was looking at the room, Kiki also found a lot of strange things hanging on the wall, which attracted Kiki's attention. "Since we all think that this place is good, then we will live here." Poplar Fruit laughed, "But at the same time, we will lose the opportunity to choose other rooms. Don't regret it." "I won't regret it. I like the second room very much." Kiki happily jumped around the room and said. To be honest, Poplar Fruit felt that the next 3 rooms were not necessarily better than the second yurt he chose. After all, it was so luxurious and seemed to be the best match. But Poplar Fruit was still very happy with his daughter's attitude. He wanted to strike while the iron was hot and tell his daughter the story of a monkey losing a watermelon to pick up sesame. "Poplar Fruit, have you guys already chosen?" Lu Yi and Nua Yi were second. They had also arrived. When they walked in to take a look, they realized that Chi-Chi was already living here. "Brother Nua Yi, can you come to my house to play?" Kiki and Nua Yi's good friends laughed and played together. Good. Nua Yi danced with joy, beaming with joy. "Don't say okay. Lu Yi quickly dragged his son whose heart was already held by Kiki and said, "We still have to find our own room." Later, We will find Kiki to play." After that, Lu Yi dragged Nua Yi and left in a hurry. The rest of the fathers were about the same. First, it was Dajuan and Lin Yongjian. Then, it was Kong Kong and Hu Jun. When they passed by Yanghua's door, they all stopped to take a look. Then, they continued to walk to the back to look for their own house. Poplar Fruit happily greeted them. It felt like a noble master was about to invite guests to his family's dinner party. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit remembered something. 5 pairs of father and son. He chose the second one. The third pair would be chosen from the third to the 5th. That left only Zhou Shimin and his son, who had to take care of their youngest son, Hao Hao. Then they had no choice. All that was left was the most arduous pile of grass. Number 1. If it was the previous 2 trips, Poplar Fruit would not think about Zhou Shimin's family. But this time, he brought along a little burden. Xian was already the youngest. Now, there was an even younger one. No matter how he looked at it, Zhou Shimin had enough. Yanghua frowned. She walked to the door of the yurt and looked in the original direction. It wasn't easy to take care of Hao Hao. Zhou Shimin hadn't come over yet. On the other hand, the village chief was riding a tall horse and carrying little chubby Xian happily. Poplar Fruit waved his hand and called his daughter over. He squatted down and let his daughter sit on his lap and said, "Kiki, did you see Xian's father?" "I saw him." Kiki was confused by her father's question. She nodded in confusion and did not understand what her father wanted to say. Xian's father has to take care of 2 children today, Xian and Hao Hao. Xian is only 3 years old, and Hao Hao is even younger. He is only 2 years old. Poplar Fruit said to his daughter, "This is very difficult. You know, Hao Hao is not as obedient as you were when you were 2 years old. Then Uncle Zhou Shimin is very pitiful." The little girl nodded kindly and said, Then, Daddy, can we help him? I also want to help him, but there's one thing that I want Kiki to understand." Poplar Fruit rubbed his daughter's head lovingly and said with a smile, "Xian's father walks so slowly. They can't find a good house and can only sleep here." Yanghua pointed at the haystack. She didn't beat around the bush, and directly he said to her daughter, "But Hao Hao is so young. He can't live in such an environment. He'll get sick at night. So, Dad, do you want us to change houses with Xian's family?" Chi-Chi was stunned for a moment. Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter's expression and explained, "We will give Xian the second room, and then we will live in the first room. Okay?" "Okay." The little girl nodded and was very straightforward. Poplar Fruit's prepare persuasion words were all blocked. Poplar Fruit was stunned. He did not expect his daughter to be so easy to persuade. "Is it really okay?" Poplar Fruit asked again, with concern. "If we change to the first room, we won't be as comfortable as the second room, and then we will have to sleep on the haystack. Are you willing to give up such a beautiful house?" "I like the second room very much, but I don't want Xian's daddy to be sad." Kiki took her father's hand and frowned slightly. She said with a compassionate look, Hao Hao's brother is here for the first time, and he also wants to live in a good house with his daddy. If he lives in the first room, he will cry." It turned out that the little girl had considered Hao Hao's brother's feelings. Poplar Fruit was moved and kissed his daughter on the forehead. He said with a smile, "Then we will give them the second room." Poplar Fruit stood up and went back to the second room to take out his bag. Then he took his daughter's hand and went to the haystack in the first room. Poplar Fruit put his backpack on it, patted the haystack, and said to his daughter with a smile, "It's not bad. It's soft and very comfortable." Kiki raised her head and looked at the sky. She raised her arms happily as if she wanted to hug the blue sky and asked, "Papa, can we see the stars at night?" "Of course, what's wrong? Haven't you seen enough?" Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter and asked with a smile. Seeing the little girl nod her head, Yanghua laughed heartily and picked up her daughter. She pointed at the comfortable pile of grass and said, Chi-Chi, look, we can lie here tonight. When we open our eyes, they'll be filled with stars. There's nothing to hide, it's all there. Kiki had been fascinated by the beautiful scene described by her father. Looking at her sparkling eyes, she liked it very much. On the other side, the village chief finally arrived with Xian on a tall horse. Xian was carried down by Yanghua. Chi-Chi was very curious and envious. When the village chief asked her, she excitedly asked her father to carry her up and happily rode off with the village chief. Poplar Fruit took Schwan's hand and pointed to the big yurt to Zoe Shimon, who just came with his little son, and said with a smile, "Brother Zoe, this is your room." "Our room? It's the last room, and there's still such a good room?" Zoe Shimon looked around and asked in surprise. At this time, Jun came from behind, together with Kong Kong. He took the things and placed them on Yonggua's haystack. He also said to Zoe Shimon, "Shimon, this room 1 is ours. Your room is at the back, and it's a carriage room. Xian should like it. Take him to see it." This time, Zoe Shimon was completely confused. Which one is it? Chapter 13:01. Brother Jun. Poplar Fruit quickly walked up, patted the haystack, and said with a smile, "Brother Jun, this haystack is mine. You and Kong Kong should go back to the carriage room." "What do you mean?" Jun glared at him and said, "Don't you live in the second room?" Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "Isn't it the same as you? In the spirit of friendship, I discussed with my daughter and decided to give the second room to Brother Zoe. They need it more." Zoe Shimon understood that the first room was the last one left. He quickly waved his hand and said, "Poplar Fruit, you can't do that. You worked hard to get it." "Brother Zoe," Poplar Fruit said with a smile, "don't refuse. I can solve this problem. You and your 2 children should live in a better room. It's okay. The second room is yours." Jun also persuaded Zoe Shimon to accept the second room. The carriage room was too narrow. If he had other choices, he would not have given the carriage room to Zoe Shimon, who had 2 children. "Shimon, don't refuse. What choice do you have? How is so young? Do you want him to live in the open haystack?" Under the repeated persuasion of Poplar Fruit and Jun, Zoe Shimon finally accepted the most luxurious yurt. He took the children back to tidy up, and Poplar Fruit and Jun continued to fight. Jun was naturally unwilling to give up. He said, "Poplar Fruit, listen to me. Today this room is for me and Kong. You didn't sleep well last night. Do you want to live in such a bad room today? You take care of your daughter. Don't you feel sorry for Kiki? We'll sleep here. It's more difficult." Kong Kong also supported her father. Poplar Fruit chuckled and said, "Brother Jun, you're wrong. You're not a fish. How can you know the happiness of a fish?" Although the conditions were a little harsh, Kiki really liked the environment yesterday and today. She even said to me that she wanted to continue watching the stars tonight. "That won't do. You've been living in this house for 2 consecutive days. Can Kiki's body take it?" Jun asked. "Kiki is in good health," Poplar Fruit said with a smile. "Brother Jun, you don't have to fight. You can stay in this house for 2 nights. You can come back next time." "Hey, what are you saying? Come back next time." Jun was also amused by Poplar Fruit. "Kong Kong, I heard that you also had a nosebleed this morning." Poplar Fruit patted Kong Kong's shoulder gently and asked, "I think it was really hard for you to climb the mountain of flames yesterday. Also, you didn't have a good rest yesterday, right? You also slept in the yard." Jun was silent at this time. He also thought of his son's nosebleed in the morning. Although he said, "A little blood is nothing to be afraid of," in his heart, even though Jun often played the role of a tough guy, how could he not be worried about his son? Poplar Fruit struck while the iron was hot and said to Jun, "That's why Kong Kong needs a good rest the most. Although Kiki is a girl, she has been practicing boxing with me since she was young. She rarely gets sick and her body is in good condition." Jun was a little moved by Poplar Fruit. He turned to look at his son and asked, "Kong, what do you think?" Poplar Fruit saw that Kong Kong was still a little hesitant. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, Kong Kong. Kiki is fine. She can't wait to sleep on this pile of grass. She can even watch the stars at night. Of course, maybe you will come and play with her again at night." At this time, Kong Kong nodded and said, "Okay then, next time, if you choose a bad house next time, you can exchange with us." Poplar Fruit looked at the stubborn and kind boy in front of him and said with a smile, "Okay, it's settled." Not long after Kong Kong and her father left for the carriage house, Kiki also came back. She rode a horse under the protection of the village head. She was so happy that she couldn't stop. She kept telling her father about her riding experience. In fact, the first room was not only a haystack, but also a simple tent on the ground. If it was set up, it would be like camping in the wild, and it could shelter them from the wind and rain. Poplar Fruit didn't think it could shelter them from the rain. On the prairie, when it rained, Poplar Fruit would definitely take his daughter to hide in Zoshimin's yurt. But Kiki didn't want her father to set up a tent. She took her father's hand and begged, "Papa, we don't need a tent, okay? We want to watch the stars at night." Not only did they want to watch the stars, but Kiki also wanted to continue the story of the constellations that her father didn't finish yesterday. "Poplar Fruit, Kiki, our house is very big. Why don't we sleep together tonight? I saw the big bed. There is a table in the middle, and there's a lot of space to sleep on both sides." After Zoshimin cleaned up, he came out and wanted to invite Poplar Fruit to live in the second room. Poplar Fruit waved his hand and said with a smile, "You see, she doesn't even want me to set up a tent. She wants to watch the stars at night, so forget it. Kiki wants to sleep outside tonight." Kiki was also holding Xuan's hand and invited him. Xian, let's watch the stars together tonight, okay? There are so many beautiful stars at night." "Okay, I want to watch the stars too." Xian looked at her favorite sister and was so happy that her small eyes almost disappeared. In the end, the choice of the house was finally decided. The program team gave the dads 1 hour to pack up and rest. During this period, the dads and the kids were having a lot of fun. The main reason was that there were some leather armors and weapons in the grassland yurts, which were similar to those of ancient warriors. So the fathers gathered together and took turns to cosplay. Kiki and her friends didn't want to be outdone. Although they couldn't be Spartan warriors, they also hid in the big yurt of Zoshimin's house and dressed themselves up with sheets, fruit baskets, and other tools. Nuo-E and Xian were very involved. Even Kong resisted the urge to let Kiki put a flower in his ear. Of course, Kiki dressed herself up more interestingly. The little girl used the sheet as a headscarf and instantly turned into a cute and charming little girl of the Kazakh people. After playing around, the fathers took the children to the gathering place that the village chief had asked them to participate in the grassland sports meet. The fathers sent 5 teams of father and son, and the Kazakh people also sent 5 teams of father and son. One of them was father and daughter. However, this time, it wasn't a game between the fathers' team and the Kazakh people's team. The village chief asked the children to touch the stones, red or blue. Those who got the same color would be in the same team. In this way, the fathers' team would be separated and mixed with the Kazakh people's team. Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "Village chief, what if the stones we touch are the same color? How is that possible?" Lin Yongjian smiled and said, "The probability is too low. How is it impossible?" Chapter 1302. Xian was red, Kiki was red, and Kong was also red. When Jun also took out a red stone, the village chief and the other fathers were all dumbfounded. The children didn't know anything and cheered. They were happy to be with their friends, but this wasn't the village chief's original plan. The village chief glanced at the jinxed Poplar Fruit and smiled bitterly. Just now, Poplar Fruit said that our babies wouldn't get the same stone. We didn't believe it, but now it seems that the possibility is very high. The probability was very low before, but now there was only Nuo-E and a Kazakh child left. Whether they succeeded or not, the probability became 50%. Luckily, Lu Yanhua had managed to find the blue stone. This way, the team would be split into 4 pairs of star fathers, 1 pair of Kazakh father and son, while Lu Yanhua and his son would form another team with the other 4 pairs of Kazakh father and son. After shaking hands with his new teammate, Poplar Fruit smiled and asked him some Kazakh to get closer. Kazakh and Uyghur were both Turkic languages, but there were some differences. Uyghur belonged to the southeast branch, while Kazakh belonged to the northwest branch. Compared to Uyghur, Kazakh was more similar to the Kyrgyz language that Poplar Fruit had learned and the Tatar language that he had studied. Therefore, Poplar Fruit quickly went from a stranger to a beginner, and his relationship with his teammates became much closer. The first competition of the Grassland Games was wrestling. Although the format was a little different, the fathers had to tie balloons to their backs. It didn't affect the essence of wrestling. After all, they had to throw each other and make their backs hit the ground. Only then could the balloons burst. The first to go up was Zoe Shimon. He smiled and said to Poplar Fruit and the others, "I'll go first. I'll test the water for you guys." Poplar Fruit and the village chief thought that Zoe Shimon had a high chance of winning. After all, he still had explosive strength. Although his opponent was a little stronger, Zoe Shimon was a world champion. The village chief repeatedly emphasized this point. However, who knew that after Zoe Shimon went up, he wasn't used to the rhythm of wrestling. His lower body wasn't stable, and after holding on for a while, he was thrown to the ground by his opponent. See, the fathers all took a deep breath. Kiki was also shocked and shrunk to her father's side. It was too miserable. The skinny Zoe Shimon was pressed under the body of a burly man who was nearly twice his size. Zoe Shimon's figure could barely be seen, and only his miserable screams could be heard. "Are you okay?" After Zoe Shimon got up, the fathers all went up to him to express their condolences. They saw Zoe Shimon lying on the ground, still panting. "Did you hit your back?" Lu Yi asked with concern. "No, he's too heavy. I can't breathe under his weight." "Wait a minute. Let me catch my breath." Zoe Shimon smiled sadly. Poplar Fruit squatted down and gently patted his chest twice. Then he stretched out his hand and smiled. "It's fine now." Just now, Zoe Shimon was a little out of breath. Now that Poplar Fruit had slapped him twice, it was as if his bones had returned to their original position and all his acupoints had been unobstructed. Zoe Shimon immediately recovered his breath. He gave Poplar Fruit a strange look, then pulled Poplar Fruit's hand and stood up with his waist and abdomen. Next, it was Lin Yongjian's turn. The weak Lin Yongjian struggled for a long time, but he was still suppressed to the ground. The competition was very exciting, but Poplar Fruit was paying attention to his daughter. The little girl was extremely nervous when she saw such a dangerous competition. She held her father's hand tightly, as if the abused father was her own father. "It's okay. It doesn't hurt. It's just a game." Poplar Fruit comforted her softly. He could feel that his daughter's palms were sweating. She was a little overly worried. Poplar Fruit knew that his daughter was still the same as the first time. She was afraid that he would get hurt. "Daddy is very powerful." Poplar Fruit gently laughed in his daughter's ear. "You must believe that Daddy will win." The little girl obediently nodded her head. She had been overly worried before. Under the guidance of her father's words, Kiki's trust in her father's skills began to gain the upper hand. Although the opponent was very strong, her father was even stronger. He would definitely be able to defeat them. Then he would not get hurt. In the third match, Poplar Fruit's side sent out the strong Kazakh brothers to face Lu Yi. They planned to stop the situation from collapsing. Otherwise, if they continued to lose, they would not be able to play anymore. Of course, Lu Yi could not win against the strong Kazakh brothers who often wrestled in the grasslands. Although the other party went easy on him, preventing him from losing immediately, Lu Yi persisted for a long time until he was panting and lying on the ground. Self-destruct. The dads laughed heartily. However, Lu Yi thought that something had happened to his father as he began to cry. His emotions stemmed from his conversation with the village chief in the morning. He did not want his father to get hurt. He did not want his father to lie motionless on the ground. When Lu Yi went back to hug his son to comfort him, Lu Yi voiced out his worries. "Woo-woo, I don't want you to die. A child's words carry no harm. Pooey, pooey, pooey." Of course, the audience was the same as Lu Yi. They were all very touched. Let's not talk about Lu Yi for now. The child's emotions would be adjusted in a while. In the arena, it was already the fourth round of the competition. This time, it was Poplar Fruit's turn to go on stage. Winning or losing did not matter, but Poplar Fruit was still quite interested in this wrestling competition. Wrestling was different from martial arts. There were many body techniques involved. Ignoring the hands, even the feet had things like leg entanglements, hooks, kicks, etc. For a beginner like Poplar Fruit, this was a very interesting experience. Hence, Poplar Fruit compressed his strength to be about the same as his opponents. He also gave up on the nimbleness of his Taiji fist and made himself like a clumsy rhinoceros as he wrestled with his opponent. Poplar Fruit's opponent was actually the one with the best wrestling skills and the most experience among the 5 Kazakh men. All the spectating Kazakhs thought that he would be able to easily take down Poplar Fruit, who knew that they would end up in a deadlock. They were all puzzled and thought that he had gone easy on him. However, only Poplar Fruit's opponent knew how difficult it was to deal with Poplar Fruit. He was secretly alarmed. It was not only because of Poplar Fruit's strength, but also because of Poplar Fruit's nimbleness. Although he repeatedly used his wrestling skills to test Poplar Fruit was hit by him several times at the beginning. However, after that, Poplar Fruit gradually avoided his kicks. Poplar Fruit was very happy. He was like a sponge, feeling and learning his opponent's wrestling skills. He did not use his full strength at all. He was the one who had gone easy on Poplar Fruit. However, Poplar Fruit was destined to pay a price for going easy on Poplar Fruit. In the end, Poplar Fruit was not experienced enough. His opponent was like an old fox. When he saw that he could not take down Poplar Fruit with his wrestling skills, he had an idea and set up a trap. Poplar Fruit saw that his opponent's feet were in a mess, so he took advantage of this flaw to trip his opponent. However, at that moment, his opponent's footsteps suddenly became steady. Taking advantage of Poplar Fruit's unstable footing, he stepped forward, pressed on Poplar Fruit's shoulder, and twisted it. "Damn it, I fell into his trap," Poplar Fruit exclaimed in his heart. He lost his balance and leaned back. It seemed that his shoulder was about to be pressed to the ground. Chapter 1303. As expected of an experienced grassland wrestler, Poplar Fruit's small mistake was caught by him. With a step, Poplar Fruit lost his balance. His upper limbs suddenly emitted a short burst of strength, causing Yonghua, who had been suppressing her own strength, to lose her balance and unable to turn around. She was about to fall. Amazing! Poplar Fruit praised in his heart, but he didn't give up. Poplar Fruit's legs, which were already in the air, suddenly shook. Relying on the strength of his waist and abdomen, he directly grabbed his opponent's shoulder and did a 360-degree somersault in the air. Everyone thought Poplar Fruit had lost, but they didn't expect this. They watched in shock as Poplar Fruit's feet landed steadily after the somersault, and his opponent didn't even have time to react. Their glasses fell to the ground. Was this a variety show? Was this a martial arts movie? Not only that, after Poplar Fruit flipped himself over, he twisted his opponent's arm and hooked him with his leg at an even faster speed. Subconsciously, he wanted to avoid his opponent's attack. That was a physical habit that a wrestling master had developed from years of wrestling. However, he was still not as fast as Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's hooking technique wasn't very skillful. He had just learned it from his opponent, but it was very useful. His eyes were also very sharp. In an instant, he found his opponent's footing and hooked him. His opponent fell down with his legs spread out. Such a big guy, if he fell down directly, the ground would probably shake twice. However, Poplar Fruit added more strength to his hand. When his opponent was about to fall to the ground, he stopped his body for half a second and then let go. Pop, pop, the balloon burst. Poplar Fruit had won. All of this happened in the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint. Yonghua had completed the magnificent feat of turning defeat into victory. The audience in the back row was still with their mouths wide open, their faces full of confusion. "You let me win. You let me win." Poplar Fruit smiled and reached out to pull him up, patting him on the shoulder. The man from the grassland was also straightforward. He cupped his hand with a smile and said, "Not at all. I accept my defeat wholeheartedly." He could feel that Poplar Fruit was still at ease. Poplar Fruit must have gone easy on him. However, he was also impressed. The Han man in front of him didn't know how to wrestle, but his learning speed was amazing. Just by spinning a few rounds with him, he could actually wrestle in a decent manner. While they were still being modest to each other, the people behind them finally reacted. "He won. Kiki, your father won." Jun shouted. "Yes, my papa won." The little girl, who was held by Hu Jun, also danced happily with her friends. Kiki had forgotten all her worries at this moment, and her heart was filled with pride and excitement. "Well done." The fathers congratulated each other and cheered for Poplar Fruit's desperate counterattack. Poplar Fruit walked back with a smile and high-fived them one by one. Then he squatted down in front of his daughter and pointed to the side of his face. The little girl immediately understood and went forward to hug her father's neck. She kissed her father's face sweetly and said with admiration, "Papa is the best." Poplar Fruit rubbed the little girl's head and smiled with satisfaction. Next, it was June's turn. After 2 big victories, the children's confidence began to rise. Xian and June stood together, while Kiki leaned on her father and stood next to them, cheering for June. However, at this time, Kong walked alone to the crowd where the director's sister was and hid. She secretly peeked out from behind a pillar and looked very worried. The director's sister asked softly, Kong, what's wrong? Why don't you go and cheer for your father?" Kong pouted angrily and said in a muffled voice, "He won't let me help." It turned out that Kong had tried to ask her father to help her father defeat his opponent, but June refused. He didn't want his son to always win by cheating like in the morning. This wasn't a good habit. However, in the field, June and his opponent were in a stalemate. They wrestled together and turned several times, but no one could move the other. Kong nervously came out from behind the pillar, wanting to see more clearly. Although he was angry with his father, the little boy still wanted his father to win. In terms of size, June was stronger than his opponent, but in terms of wrestling skills, June was still inferior, so he was dragged into a stalemate by his opponent. Zhou Shimin found out and shouted, "Brother June, he's wasting your strength. Go up and trip him." Poplar Fruit, who was always calm, was also affected by the enthusiastic atmosphere around him. He waved his fist and shouted. It was as if he was the coach on the sidelines. "Come on, Daddy Kong, come on." June shouted, "Daddy Kong, come on." Chi followed suit. She cupped her hands around her mouth like a trumpet and cried out while her eyes turned into crescent moons from smiling. After a stalemate for a while, June finally seized an opportunity when his opponent came forward to attack. He suddenly used his strength and pressed his opponent to the ground with brute force. He won. June actually won. 3-2, Team Red won. The 3 fathers clenched their fists and cheered. This was something they didn't expect. They actually won 3 rounds in a row and turned defeat into victory. They pulled June, who just got up from the ground, and pulled the Kazakh brothers, who won the crucial 3rd round. The 5 of them laughed and walked around in a circle. At this time, Kong came out from his hiding place. The little boy's laughter was hidden, but the camera captured it. He ran to his father's side with joy and hugged his father's thigh without saying a word. "You brat." June rubbed his hair and smiled with slight blame. "Why didn't you cheer for your father just now? Where did you go?" Squat down, Kong said in a light voice. He was no longer as worried and nervous as before. When his father squatted down, he popped the balloons behind his father one by one. "He's really your son." Zhou Shimin and Poplar Fruit laughed. "Let's have a competition, too." Xian and June didn't walk into the cheering crowd. They were still immersed in the exciting atmosphere of the wrestling competition. The 2 children walked to the open space and decided to have some fun, too. Xian wasn't used to wrestling for the first time. He was pushed down by June, who was a head taller than him. "Haha, I won." June cheered happily. One more time." Xian jumped up from the ground and shouted energetically. The second time, Xian put in a lot of effort. He tangled with June for a while. June was the older brother and was taller than Xian. However, he inherited his father's talent and was quickly pushed to the ground by Xian. One-on-one, neither of them was convinced, so they went for it again. But this time, Xian's strength gained the upper hand. June pulled him down. "Did you see how good I am?" Xian laughed in a childish voice. "What's so good about that?" "This isn't good." June wasn't convinced. "Then you have to be brave and challenge me." Xian was like a champion. He fought with June and threw him down a few times. "I won," Xian said happily. "You lost," June said stubbornly. "I really won." "You really lost." "All right, I won't fight with him anymore." Xian heard his father's call and ran back. Chapter 1304. Since there were matches between adults, there were also matches between children. The village chief began to announce the rules of the children's wrestling competition. Unlike the Fathers' one-on-one matches, the children competition was 2-on-2. Of course, Poplar Fruit could not tell the difference. It was just like two pairs of one-on-one matches starting at the same time. In the first round of 2-on-2 matches, Poplar Fruit's team, Team Red, won. Their Kazakh kid was tall and easily won against his opponent. Of course, the two kids' wrestling skills were also up to standard, making the fathers click their tongues in wonder. And the most interesting ones were Nuo, E, and Kong Kong. Nuo E came up and gave Kong Kong a kiss, making the fathers laugh. Unfortunately, a competition was a competition. Kong Kong threw Nuo E to the ground without mercy. This poked a hornet's nest, and Nuo E cried sadly. Poplar Fruit patted Kiki and let her comfort her little friend. He also patted Nuo E's head and smiled. It's okay. You've already performed very well. However, Poplar Fruit did not think that Nuo E crying was something praiseworthy. Although he was still young, he was still a boy. He should have the courage to fall and the courage to endure setbacks. On this point, Yang Guo admired Kong Kong, especially when she heard that Kong Kong had climbed the Flaming Mountain. He had followed Lin Yongjian back and forth without any complaints of tiredness. Although he had a nosebleed in the end, it still reflected the strangeness of a man. Without further ado, it was Dejun and Xian's turn to be paired up. From the start, these two buffoons had been hysterically cheering for their opponent, Nuo E. Now, they foolishly treated each other as their opponents and prepared to fight. Hey, don't fall, Lin Yongjian said with a bitter smile. The village chief did not know whether to laugh or cry as he walked over and explained, It's you two. Fall with them. All right, but the two clowns continued to bring laughter to the audience. They were asked to move their bodies and warm up, but in the end, they foolishly lay on the ground and did push-ups. Look at their little butts moving up and down like two little pigs looking for food. The audience in front of the TV was about to kneel on the ground from laughter. Maintain your strength. The fathers helplessly shouted again. They really couldn't do anything to them. Could these two clowns defeat each other? Poplar Fruit felt that it was impossible. Looking at their size, the two kids opposite them were half a head taller than them, and this was not even taking into account the disparity in their wrestling skills. It was indeed impossible. At the beginning of the match, the two children of the red team were both thrown to the ground by their opponents. Indeed, Xian and Dejun were not convinced. Although they had already lost, they still stood up and continued to fight. Good. It's fine. Dejun was thrown to the ground several times in a row. Lin Yongjian saw that his son was so dizzy that he couldn't stand up. His heart ached as he came over to carry his son back. Everyone also felt that it was time to end it. However, Zhou Shimin was still behind Xian. He clapped his hands and shouted, It's okay. Again. Xian was thrown to the ground several times in a row. Poplar Fruit raised his eyebrows. He realized that little chubby Xian, who usually liked to slack off, did not complain about being tired this time. Little chubby Xian seemed to be stubborn as he stood up and continued to charge at his opponents. Our kid definitely has good stamina. Zhou Shimin was also excited at this moment. He smiled at the village chief and said, Let him play for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Only Zhou Shimin could be so heartless. If he could fall 7 or 8 times in a minute, how many times would he fall in 10 minutes? The other fathers looked at Xian in admiration, who had repeatedly fallen down and stood up again and again. Little chubby Xian was chubby, but at this moment, he had transformed into the Hulk who would never admit defeat. He fell, got up again, fell, got up again. How many times did he fall? Poplar Fruit couldn't remember, but he could see the determined expression on Xian's face after he stood up. From his eyes, he could see the fire burning in his heart. There was no need to guess, no need to see. Everyone knew that this would be the most iconic scene of this episode. Indeed, Xian's indomitable spirit moved countless people sitting in front of the TV, especially the girls. After this scene, who knew how many people had thought little chubby Xian was a pervert, but at this moment, even passersby had turned into fans. In the audience, except for Zhou Shimin, who was still shouting for Xian to stand up, the other fathers were quietly watching. They didn't know if they were shocked or moved by Xian's performance, including Poplar Fruit, who was also looking at Xian with surging emotions. For a 3-year-old child to be able to do this, it was really not easy. But after seeing him fall so many times and fall so miserably, Poplar Fruit couldn't help but want to go on stage for him and help him defeat his opponents. At first, Kiki hid in her father's arms as she couldn't bear to watch. But later, she couldn't help but look up and see Xian stand up again and again. She couldn't help but jump together with Dejun and the others, cheering loudly for Xian. Xiaohan said that when he first watched the show, Xiaohan also completely fell in love with little chubby Xian through this scene. Poplar Fruit suddenly remembered that last time in Min Province, after he had sparred with Zhou Shimin had suggested that Xian practice martial arts with him. At that time, Poplar Fruit didn't have any intention of taking in a disciple, and he also wanted to observe Xian's character. Other things aside, Poplar Fruit wanted to give up on Xian's perverted desire to get close to his daughter. But now, it seemed that he had underestimated little chubby Xian. Even Xian's performance was enough to move Poplar Fruit. Choosing a disciple himself, a disciple who wanted to learn real martial arts, other than being righteous and kind, wouldn't he also want an indomitable, like Xian? If he was like Nua Yi, crying when he lost, it would be better to be a weak and pretty boy. Why would he want to learn martial arts? Of course, Poplar Fruit's idea of taking in a disciple was just a sudden interest, and he hadn't put it into action yet. He wasn't in a hurry to take in a disciple on the spot, and he just made a mental note to observe Xian before bringing it up to Zhou Shimin in the future. While Poplar Fruit was deep in thought, everyone suddenly burst into laughter. This was because they could see that Xian, who had been thrown countless times, suddenly stepped back, as if he was cowering in fear. But Poplar Fruit didn't see it that way. He saw steadiness in Xian's steps, sharpness in Xian's eyes, and a trace of wisdom in the strategy he adopted. Sure enough, as Poplar Fruit expected, Xian retreated to give himself more space to attack. A lump of meat rushed over from afar, and with lightning speed, rushed towards the Kazakh child who was tired of being thrown around. Boom! Xian was thrown to the ground once again. Strategies also needed to be built on the foundation of strength. The difference in ability and experience between the two children was too great, so great that it was almost impossible to make up for it. Chapter 13:05. The Kazakh boy knocked Xian down again. He stood up, panting, and looked at his father helplessly. The expression in his eyes seemed to be saying, "Is this enough? Why is he not done yet?" The men of the grassland should be able to let go of things, not like Xian. However, from the point of view of the fathers and the program team, Xian's efforts were very encouraging. Just as the Kazakh boy turned around gloomily, a fat shadow suddenly appeared behind him. It was Xian. He quickly got up, then jumped like a tiger, and fell to the ground with his opponent. Yeah, the fathers cheered. Even if they had lost 100 times, winning once was enough to cheer them up. What's more, winning once wasn't the end, but a new beginning. Of course, Xian had used a sneak attack to gain an unfair advantage. However, thinking about it, Xian's strength was not as good as his opponent's, and he had fought for so long. He had exhausted his opponent's strength, and then took him down in one fell swoop when his opponent was unprepared. Poplar Fruit smiled happily. He liked the fat boy more and more. He had courage, wisdom, and perseverance. He was indeed a good candidate for a disciple. He did not immediately ask for a disciple. He might tell Zhou Shimin later in private, because he did not want to be too flamboyant and bring trouble to himself. At this moment, Yang Guo was only 27 years old. He was young, but his skills were definitely not ordinary. Even in the present or ancient times, he would be considered a grandmaster. If he wanted to take in a disciple who had the qualifications to raise questions, the village chief praised Xian again. Then, he was ready to announce the next round of the competition. Hey, village chief, she hasn't competed yet. Poplar Fruit smiled and pointed at his daughter. Yes, the 4 boys had already competed. He couldn't leave out Kiki, right? The village chief looked at Poplar Fruit strangely. He secretly complained in his heart. What a father! He is willing to let his daughter wrestle with others. He asked doubtfully, girls don't have to compete, right? This wrestling is not very suitable for girls. Let her have a try. Don't look down on girls. Poplar Fruit smiled and explained, the main thing is that I want Kiki to experience it. No matter if it is sour, sweet, bitter, or spicy, she has to experience it herself to know how it feels. Watching the other children play, Kiki would never know how it felt to wrestle and be wrestled. Even if she was wrestled, it would not necessarily be painful. Do you want to go up and play? Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter and asked with a smile. Kiki had not recovered from the excitement of cheering for her brother. She held her father's hand and nodded with a smile. She said in a clear voice, of course. Since Chi-Chi had said so, the village chief couldn't refuse. The reason why he didn't want girls to compete before was because he was worried that Chi-Chi was delicate and would cry if she fell. Let alone Chi-Chi being a girl. It didn't matter if it was a boy or a girl. The children in the city were all spoiled since childhood. How could they endure hardships? Didn't Nuai cry just now? I hope Kiki can be stronger. The village chief looked forward to it. Poplar Fruit also thought the same, but he hoped that his daughter could be as strong as Xian. However, the changes in the plot were hard to predict. He asked Chi-Chi to wrestle with the little Kazakh girl on the other side, but the result was that the 2 girls hugged each other gently and swayed back and forth. It was no different from the friendly hug they had received at the request of the village head referee just now. Ha ha ha! The 2 girls were about the same height. They were shy when they saw strangers. They hugged each other and looked at each other. Then, they could not help but laugh. Hey, you 2 are wrestling. The fathers did not know whether to laugh or cry. Poplar Fruit also smiled and shook his head. Although Xian, Dajuan, and the other children were shouting, Kiki, sister, you can do it. The 2 girls were not willing to use force. They were not willing to push each other down. We are good friends. Kiki turned her head and said to her father with a smile. Okay, I know you are good friends. Poplar Fruit spread his hands helplessly. It seemed that they could not compete in wrestling. How was it wrestling between the 2 children? They were obviously playing house to make friends. Now, I announce that the winners of this round are Kiki and Yenakana. The village chief raised the 2 girls' hands. Chi-Chi ran back to her father's side and giggled as she pulled her father's hand and said, Papa, I made another friend. Her name is Yenakana. Very good, very good. Poplar Fruit said with a smile, you can share the victory with your friend. Papa thinks you are very good. Although the result was not satisfactory, and it was not as Poplar Fruit had expected that Kiki would learn to face setbacks and fall, Poplar Fruit was still very pleased. At least, his daughter was very kind. She treated people with kindness and could also gain the love of others. Next, there was a candy eating competition for the children. However, it was not easy to eat the candy because it was buried in the pile of milk powder. Then, they could not use their hands to pick it up. They could only use their faces to find it. After a few rounds, the children all became white and puffy cats. Kiki was the same. Her originally delicate and pretty little face was now like a Beijing opera makeup. It was impossible to recognize her. When Poplar Fruit cleaned the milk powder on her nose and mouth, the little girl was very naughty and wiped a handful of milk powder on her father's face. Ha ha ha! Because the little girl's nose was not very good, her laughter was a little muffled. On her white face, only a pair of clear eyes could be seen clearly. Papa hasn't laughed at you yet. Poplar Fruit smiled and pinched the little girl's nose. He said intimately, you are like a little cat. In this round of the competition, the most outstanding performance was not Dejun, but he was the one who had made the most progress. We have to give special praise to Lin Dejun. Everyone knows that Dejun usually likes to be clean. But today, Dejun, even if he gets a little dirty, it doesn't matter. But we are doing this for the competition, right? Dejun had made progress, but he did not work as hard as the village chief said. The village chief was a little exaggerated, but he was very good at grasping the child's thoughts. In front of everyone, he smiled and praised that Junlin Yongjian was not the only one who smiled in relief. Dejun also nodded happily. Since he had made progress this time, Dejun would definitely be able to do better next time. When it came to a child's education, they could not keep suppressing him. If they suppressed him until he lost confidence and developed a rebellious mentality, it would definitely backfire. It was better to encourage him and let him feel a sense of honor and pride for doing the right thing. This way, he would be able to take the initiative to do better next time. Chapter 1306. After a tiring day of gaming, everyone gathered at Zhou Shimon's yurt for dinner. Other than the dishes, there was also a sumptuous barbecue. The grill was set up by Lin Yongjian and the other fathers, while the barbecue was done by Poplar Fruit. The fragrant barbecue lamb skewers, beef, and chicken drumsticks were grilled until the oil dripped and burst, filling the air with a fragrant aroma. When the barbecue was done, a few of the children were brought to take a bath. Otherwise, looking at the way the fathers swallowed their saliva, the children's saliva would have drowned the grassland. This also gave Poplar Fruit, who had been disgusted by noodles for the past 3 trips, a chance to show off his skills. For some reason, Poplar Fruit was satisfied when he saw the 6 children eating so happily. Of course, not all of them were eating. There were some twists and turns in the process. Due to Lu Ye's concern for Kong Kong, he said a few more words to Kong Kong not to eat too much barbecue. None of his words were harsh, but in the end, Kong Kong cried. This made Lu Yi panic, and the other fathers quickly comforted Kong Kong. No one expected the usually cold and strong Kong Kong to cry so easily. I'm not blaming you. Your uncle Lu Yi is doing this for your own good. Hu Jun did not think that this was a big problem. He smiled and patted Kong Kong's shoulder. I know. Brother Kong Kong is crying because my papa's cooking is super delicious. Kiki was always her father's #1 fan. She chewed on a chicken drumstick and giggled. She did not finish her sentence. The little girl meant that Kong Kong cried because he could not bear to part with the delicious food. Of course, this reasoning was wrong, but it still made the fathers laugh. The tense atmosphere from before eased quite a bit. It's fine. Kong Kong was a man. He only felt wronged for a short while. Soon, he thought it through and sat at the side with pursed lips. Poplar Fruit tore apart a barbecued chicken drumstick with chopsticks and ate the crispy part. He tore off the fragrant but not hot chicken inside and wrapped it in a green leaf before passing it to Kong Kong. Try this. Vegetable buns with meat. Is it delicious? Poplar Fruit said with a smile. Usually, the children would play together noisily, but this time, they couldn't stop eating. Every one of them was eating in silence, and no one spoke. Xian was even more ferocious. His face was covered in oil from the chicken drumstick. He hadn't even finished eating the drumstick when he saw his father picking up mutton for Hao Hao. He couldn't wait to open his mouth and cry for food. His mouth was full. Eat slowly, don't rush. Poplar Fruit smiled and patted Xian's back to help him calm down. No, I'm telling you, Poplar Fruit, your barbecue skills are definitely this. Lin Yongjian gave a thumbs up and laughed. The other fathers also agreed. Poplar Fruit didn't feel embarrassed and smiled generously. It's good that you like it. If you all come to Yangcheng, I'll definitely bring your children to our house to play. I don't dare to say anything else, but I'll definitely treat you well. Poplar Fruit was a hospitable person, especially now that his career had stabilized. Teachers, students, old friends, and even colleagues from the foreign trade company often came to his house. But Kiki was even more hospitable. When the little girl heard her father's words, she happily pulled Nuo, who was beside her, and said, Brother, come to my house to play, okay? My papa can make a lot of delicious food. The little girl didn't show favoritism. After getting Nuo-yi's nod, she happily ran over to Brother Kong Kong and Brother Dajuan. I want to go too. Xian didn't care about eating the drumstick. He had long admired the little sister's house. He heard that there were a lot of fun things to do, a lot of delicious food, and most importantly, there were beautiful little sisters. That's right, come to my house to play together." Chi-Chi wrapped her arms around them and said happily. To be able to get the nod of so many good friends, Kiki was very happy. After tidying up the table, the village chief began to chat with the children. This was the last segment of the night. However, the fathers couldn't stay in the tent. They all went outside to wait. When they came back, the village chief explained that the reason he sent the fathers away was to let the 5 children vote for the most popular father. Each child had 2 votes, and they could even choose their own father. Poplar Fruit and Lin Yongjin looked at each other and smiled. Maybe it wouldn't be too bad. Even if there weren't any other places, maybe their children would have at least 1 vote. Why didn't Poplar Fruit have that much confidence? Actually, it didn't mean that the children would vote for him just because he was handsome. Because Lu Yi was so active, he had a higher chance of getting the votes of the majority of the children. Although Poplar Fruit was the most affectionate father, he wasn't active. Among the 5 fathers, he didn't leave as deep an impression on the children as the serious Lin Yongjin. Hu Jun was also very capable. Although he usually had a straight face, he could stand up at critical moments to mediate the atmosphere. He also protected the children whose fathers went on missions. He was cold on the outside, but warm on the inside. He was meticulous and had a good reputation among the children. The village chief was also bad. He asked him to start from the back, but he chose to start from the second place in the middle. In second place, there were 2 small-eyed brothers, Lin Yongjin and Zhou Shimin. This made the 2 of them feel flattered. They were actually in second place. Zhou Shimin's votes, other than his own son, Dajuan also voted for him. The reason was very interesting. It was because Zhou Shimin had taught him how to fight. It looked like the fight between Xian and Dajuan in the afternoon was quite effective. What was interesting was that other than his son's vote, Lin Yongjin also received Kiki's vote. The reason why Kiki voted for Lin Yongjin was very simple. Yesterday, Lin Yongjin had invited her to his house for a meal. Then, she felt that Uncle Lin Yongjin was a very nice person and was very amiable. It looked like Lin Yongjin was a loving father. However, when it came to his children, Lin Yongjin was a little anxious. From Kiki's point of view, Lin Yongjin was also a good father. It could be seen that children's preferences were constantly changing. Unless it was a deep affection, their impression of a person could easily change. But what surprised Lu Yi was not that he also got second place, but that the person who voted for him was Kong Kong. Just now, Kong Kong was so aggrieved by his words that she cried. Although the little boy cried, he still understood later on. Lu Yi was doing it for his own good. He was earnestly advising him. If he didn't love him, why would he be so long-winded? Kong Kong's vote had touched Lu Yi to the core. He even said a lot of apologetic words to her. The Fire Glory Society's president was usually like a child. He was very sincere and straightforward. He spoke without thinking, but he was indeed concerned about every child. It was just that he did not pay attention to his own words. To educate the other children like how he educated his own children was somewhat inappropriate. Chapter 1307. If it was not Lu Yi, then the remaining 3 places were already revealed. Of course, Poplar Fruit and Hu Jun were still smiling as they humbly declined each other. The village chief could not bear to watch any longer and announced the results. First place was indeed Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit gave a speech and smiled. It's really not that I'm better than the forefathers. It's all thanks to this meal. Thank you. Thank you for the children's good graces. Hu Jun's vote was stolen by Kong Kong. Needless to say, Poplar Fruit's side, other than his daughter's vote, there were 2 votes from Xian and Nu Yi. Their reasons were included in the program. Xian was the first to express his opinion. Because Uncle Poplar Fruit's drumsticks are delicious. It was indeed in line with his gluttonous nature. This was the same as Kiki. They were both bought over by a meal. Of course, Kiki was bought over by a meal from Lin Yongjin's family. Nuo, he gave a different reason. Because Uncle Poplar Fruit is Kiki's father. She's my good friend. Nuo, he finally stopped floating. Just now, the village chief had asked him which father he liked other than his own. In the end, Nua, he said that he likes small animals. Me too. He is Big Sister's father. That's why I like him. Because I like Big Sister. Xian appeared again. Not only did he agree, he also added a final sentence. Poplar Fruit had become the most popular father among the children. Although he said that he did not mind, he was still quite happy in his heart. This was still a benefit. Did he not hear the village chief say, "Tomorrow morning at 6:30, the fathers will be milking the cows, but the most popular father does not have to go." That good? Lu Yi and the other fathers looked at Poplar Fruit with envy. Poplar Fruit chuckled. He clapped and even high-fived his daughter. However, Poplar Fruit suddenly thought of something and said, "That good? Village chief, are you trying to trick me?" Poplar Fruit felt that although it was a good thing to have a holiday, the village head was not a kind person. His foxtail had not been revealed yet. "I also feel that there's more to it," Lu Yi said. Soon, Poplar Fruit could no longer smile. What is this dad doing at home? Although the village chief was smiling, Poplar Fruit always felt that he was smiling wickedly. "I have to be responsible for all the babies waking up, dressing, eating, and going to the toilet, then let them cry and make them happy." Heavens! Poplar Fruit felt that he had been cheated. He wanted to cry, but had no tears. This time, he was really dumbfounded. It was not that he was afraid of 6 children. In fact, he was a little afraid. But compared to taking care of children, especially children who might be grumpy, when they just woke up, Poplar Fruit was more willing to milk cows. "All right, can I change? Who will want to take care of a child?" Before Poplar Fruit said anything, he knew that it was impossible. Let us give a round of applause and congratulate Poplar Fruit. The village chief was very good at stirring up the atmosphere. He had just suppressed the 4 fathers to the point that they were filled with envy and jealousy towards Poplar Fruit. Now, he had stirred up everyone's enthusiasm to celebrate Poplar Fruit's misfortune. All right, looking at the father's expressions of exultation and celebration, Poplar Fruit knew that no one would change with him. "Why are you clapping?" Poplar Fruit smiled bitterly as he rubbed the little girl who was clapping. This child had pulled the other 4 children up to clap as well. "Because I like Daddy to take care of me," Kiki said happily. It turned out that she understood the village chief's words. However, Kiki wanted her father to stay by her side more than not being able to see her father when she woke up in the morning. "Poplar Fruit, you can do it. You're so good at taking care of children. 8 or 10 of them won't be a problem." The fathers laughed as they patted Poplar Fruit's shoulders. They were relieved that they didn't have to wake up in the morning to take care of the little ancestors. Poplar Fruit helplessly shook his head. He also accepted it. However, Poplar Fruit wasn't someone who was easily frustrated. While the fathers were around, he quickly asked them how they usually took care of their children. Hu Jun said the most rudely, "It's nothing. Pull him up from the bed. He can put on his own clothes. Kong Kong, tomorrow you'll be the big brother. You have to help Uncle Yang take care of the other brothers and sisters. Do you understand?" All right. Hu Jun's words were equivalent to not saying anything. The other fathers more or less said something, but they were obviously fathers who didn't know how to take care of children. The summary was also a mess. At night, everyone returned to their homes. Lu Yi and Zhou Shimin, the 2 big families, gathered around Poplar Fruit's pile of grass. While helping him set up the tent, they worriedly asked, "Will it work? The wind is so strong at night." The main thing was that they were worried about Kiki. The little girl looked delicate. Only Poplar Fruit, as a father, didn't feel sorry for her. She stayed in a poor house for 2 days and refused to stay in someone else's house. "It's okay. Actually, this tent is very comfortable." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "It's not worse than your yurts." Looking at the side, Xian and Hao couldn't help but fall asleep in the yurt. After all, they were too young. Kiki and Nuyi were still playing on the grass next to them. Nuyi hugged Kiki's neck again, but the little girl was ticklish and giggled and avoided him. "Brother Zhou, you don't have to tie her up first." Poplar Fruit smiled and said, "She still has to look at the stars for a while before sleeping, so I'll wait for her to fall asleep at night and then get up to pull up the tent." With the help of the fathers, there were only 2 steps left to the tent, so Poplar Fruit gratefully sent the two kind fathers away. At night, after listening to the story of the stars for a while, Kiki gradually fell asleep. She was still too tired from playing. But the next day, Poplar Fruit still got up very early. Even the fathers hadn't gotten up yet to milk the cows. Poplar Fruit moved around room 1. Although he got up early, the sky of the grassland was already as bright as a mirror. Coincidentally, Poplar Fruit also met a Kazakh herdsman riding a horse and herding sheep. What was more coincidental was that the other party happened to be the opponent that Poplar Fruit had wrestled yesterday. Although Poplar Fruit couldn't speak Kazakh and the other party couldn't speak Mandarin, the two had a common hobby, and that was wrestling. Of course, for Poplar Fruit, wrestling was also a kind of kung fu. Under the other party's proposal, Poplar Fruit was happy to compare notes with the master again. Poplar Fruit still suppressed his strength, but this time, the Kazakh master wrestler couldn't do anything to Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's wrestling skills had improved rapidly. In addition, he was agile and strong, so he knocked down the other party in a few moves. The Grassland Man was very forthright. If he lost, he lost. Not only was he not jealous, but he was also very happy to invite Poplar Fruit to ride his horse to play. He saw the envy in Poplar Fruit's eyes when he saw him riding a horse. After playing for a while, Poplar Fruit also learned how to ride a horse. However, this good time didn't last long. When he saw the fathers get up and walk to the cow pen, Poplar Fruit knew that his test was coming. That you're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.